both of these hands are keepable from both players, and they both decide to keep, but they're kind of at near the bottom end of the range with a fail state.
But already we see a major difference between Carvalho's deck and the other 7 Mardu Vehicles players in that Veteran Motorist can help him smooth a sketchy draw like this, whereas Walking Ballista would just be, if you ask me, a fairly unexciting 2-mana 1/1.
Absolutely, but you can see the other side of the equation here with Blohon having a hand of multiple removal spells and cards like Whirler Virtuoso, Rogue Refiner, Felidar Guardian that all generate some sort of value when they're lined up one-on-one with Veteran Motorist.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say that I'm a fan of the way Márcio has approached this deck. I haven't played Mardu Vehicles in this current standard format, but I actually used to play a straight red-white version of Vehicles, Dwarves, I used to call it, because, 4 copies of Depala, Pilot Exemplar. But Veteran Motorist was one of my absolute favorite cards in the deck. It was something that I played 4 of. I almost never boarded it out. I just thought it was so important for smoothing the draw, and this deck is so powerful when it draws an appropriate number of lands and comes out nicely that anything that helps you with that seems like it's at a premium.
Yeah, especially when you're leaning into the tribal synergies. I think that's enough to put it over the top, no question. If there's an issue with this card, it's just the way that it lines up with other cards in the format, particularly in the 4-color copycat matchup, where they have so many ways to profitably trade with it. If it sits on the sidelines, it's just a concession to that. And you can see Blohon here not messing around, was willing to use a Harness Lightning on the Toolcraft Exemplar, even without another artifact, cast another removal spell here on the Veteran Motorist, just trying to keep the battlefield as clean as possible. He can play towards that Chandra, and Chandra is capable of running away with the game here if Blohon can get the battlefield relatively stable once he gets to that point.
Yeah, this game is heading towards a spot where the players are going to be fighting over Planeswalkers, and when the battle becomes about Planeswalkers, having a nice clean board and a creature advantage is very important. So Blohon prioritizing tempo here. He knows he's going to be tapping out for the next couple of turns, and he just wants to have as stable of a board presence as possible, of a board state as possible.
Yeah, it's easy to get in that trap of trying to save the removal spells for the best stuff, and using one on a Toolcraft Exemplar with no other artifact in play doesn't feel great, but you can see with his hand being mana tight and a Chandra to play towards, Blohon just doesn't want to burn off mana. He just wants to be casting stuff every single turn. The other upshot of this is if he can spend these turns casting Whirler Virtuosos and generating a bunch of Thopters, he sort of cuts Gideon off at the pass because he'll have so many flyers on the battlefield that Carvalho can't interact with, that Blohon doesn't really have to be concerned with one of Carvalho's best cards when the game is a little bit grindy.
Yeah, and look at this. He goes straight for Saheeli Rai, which threatens potentially a win at the drop of a dime if he can find an untapped source of white mana for Felidar Guardian. Márcio having none of it, though, he's just going to slam his best card, which I can't say I blame him for.
And I think it looks like immediately making an emblem here, trying to upgrade some of these creatures because Blohon's kind of outsizing him on the battlefield a little bit. Also, I don't think Carvalho wants to spend a lot of time and energy protecting the Gideon because the fight in the air is kind of a lost cause. So instead of trying to manage the Gideon and grind out a couple night tokens, going straight for the emblem here.
Right. Also informed by the fact that he has redundant copies of Gideon in his hand.
Absolutely.
He can cash one in.
I also like Carvalho here not trying to keep up appearances, especially now that he's drawn a Spire of Industry. There's removal spells he could bluff here to try to prevent Blohon from going for the combo next turn should he have it. But Carvalho's kind of losing on the table before casting that Gideon. He's got to tap out and risk it.
I think so too. Yeah, I've lost more games to this 4-color copycat deck by outthinking myself and trying to play around the combo. And I've historically done a lot better when I just try to kill them.
Now, Blohon here, you can see going through some blocks here. He has the luxury of trading this Whirler Virtuoso if he wants to, because he still has another copy in hand plus the Healy Ride for the reset. So normally in that spot, that's one of the better things to protect, so you have an energy payout down the line. But Blohon has redundant copies, so he can use it just to manage the battlefield this turn.
Yeah, and keep in mind with the combo that he doesn't need to have a high loyalty on Saheeli. Even if she's in play with just one counter, Felidar Guardian can reset her directly to 3. So it's just a matter of whether or not it's in play and not so much protecting the loyalty counters, which I think gives Lukas a big advantage in these combat steps.
And you can see the other dimension right now, this Saheeli Ride deck. Even when you're not comboing out, Felidar Guardian and Saheeli Ride can be productive cards because there's just so many powerful 2-for-1 grindy creatures to be resetting.
So a subtle play in that turn is that Lukas decided to play Rogue Refiner before scrying, valuing setting up his next draw step. Normally, that's the way I like to sequence things, but with a lot of coming to play tapped lands and Lukas shaping up to miss his land drop, I may have tried to scry into a land, especially something like an Evolving Wilds to set up white mana for next turn.
Yeah, plus you have the other, Spire Bluff, Canal, Botanical Sanctum type lands, too, that you would want to play this turn rather than next.
Exactly.
But I like going for the Rogue Refiner there, one, because Blohon's in the market to draw a land, and two, the Rogue Refiner sets him up to 3 energy because he had 1 left over. So if he wanted to make a token with Whirler Virtuoso, he still has access to that line. And Attune the Ether off the top here, a great draw for Blohon. Gets him a land this turn, gets him access to white mana, more energy for his Whirler Virtuoso, and the 3 mana that he has left over enables either another Rogue Refiner or Whirler Virtuoso as appropriate. So great draw there.
Yeah, next to just drawing, a straight up Plains or Ether Hub, Attune with Ether is probably the best thing he could have found. He'll use that for a white mana and then deploy, I guess, another Whirler Virtuoso. Between Thopter Token and Saheeli's Plus, he can knock a couple loyalty off Gideon, but looks like Carvalho is going to get to untap with his Planeswalker also.
Yeah, I like this play here as the first order of business because, again, as you mentioned, if he draws white mana, he can just go off at any time. And if you know your turn is fine anyway, if you end up going Attune with Ether and then playing a 3-drop, you might as well just blink the Rogue Refiner as the first order of business and let it rip. Because if you draw on tap white mana, you win the game on the spot. And if you don't, then whatever, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, this is a particularly great play because it sets him up with enough energy to make an extra Thopter token. And if Márcio wants to protect his Gideon, he's going to have to fully trade a creature with this token.
Yeah, this is a great high ceiling, high floor play from Blohon. If it works out and he draws white mana, game's over on the spot. And even if not, this is a great way of managing the battlefield a little bit, drawing some extra cards, forcing some blocks here to protect the Gideon. All very good stuff for Blohon.
Yeah, so despite Márcio having what I would consider a reasonably strong draw in this game, it comes down to if he doesn't find something off of his draw step and his clue, he's going to be dead next turn to the combo.
Well, his draw, I think there's a lot of pressure on him game one to have a draw that's either very fast or able to interact once the game gets a little bit deeper. And Blohon can either threaten the combo or just grind him into dust with all these 2-for-1s. And Carvalho's draw was neither particularly fast nor particularly interactive. And even though his start looked good on the surface, I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to him having one of those 2 dimensions kind of locked up here, and his draw did not cooperate on that front.
Yeah, you make a good point.
So I imagine Carvalho here is just tanking on whether or not he wants to crack the clue before doing anything else.
Do you think he expects Felidar Guardian in Blohon's hand?
There's a very good chance because Blohon's drawn a lot of cards and he has been missing his land drops, so his hand's full of spells. You definitely can't round it up to 100% that it's there, but the missing of land drops here, a handful of spells, and a lot of looks between scries and just raw cards drawn, the odds have to be very high here.
if he wants to protect himself from the combo, he may actually have to pass the turn with the clue still in play so that he can trigger Revolt and potentially draw into a Fatal Push. Right. So, a strange, unorthodox sequencing of like tap my Spire of Industry for black mana, crack the clue, hope to draw into something. But, a slim chance is better than nothing.
Right. If you're used to Fatal Push in the Eternal formats like Modern and Beyond, you're used to it basically being a freebie because of fetch lands and other sacrifice outlets. In Standard, you got to work a little bit harder. It's not trivial to set this up here. But Carvalho, I think, knows the writing's on the wall here, knows he's likely to be comboed out here, and is giving himself at least some shot here. Also, if he happens to have Fatal Push in his hand right now, he can enable it. It's on the table. So it's a little sketchy for Blohon to go for it. Because, Carvalho hasn't been doing a whole lot either. He's got cards in his hand left over. His hand could easily contain a Fatal Push. Yeah,
and actually, Blohon has a pretty high upside play available to him here that's safer than going for the win, which is that he can plus Saheeli, as he's already done, knock the loyalty off of Gideon, then attack Gideon and finish him off with potentially blinking the Saheeli for another damage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no reason for him to get risky about it. And look at his life total is still at 20. He is under no pressure here to go for the combo if he has a safer line available to him. He still may want to run it, but he could play this super conservatively if he wants to. I mean, look at his hand against 2 cards. You got to feel like you're comfortable. You got to feel like you're confident in winning this game, even if you don't have access to the combo.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no reason to risk it if you can win fair and square.
And also, if Carvalho has to leave this clue in play to represent Fatal Push, that's even more of an incentive to not do anything. He needs action. He's losing on the table right now. And if he's going to short himself a card here to keep up appearances or enable Fatal Push, then great. Then go about your business with Rogue Refiners and Whirl of Virtuosos, and you don't have to bother comboing out.
And look at this, Chandra -3 to kill Heart of Kiran. It takes a lot of setup to be able to actually use sorcery speed removal to get rid of Heart of Kiran, but Lukas Blohon has pulled it off.
And I love this level of discipline from Blohon here, just not under any rush to fire up the combo just because it presents itself. His hand's good enough that he doesn't have to take any risks. And if Carvalho wants to keep up, he's going to have to either crack that clue and leave up a bunch of mana to represent unlicensed disintegration, or the shields go down, and then you win on the spot. And there you see the tap out there from Carvalho to, again, try to just get something going, and that shield's down, and that's the combo.
Yeah.
Really, really well played game there from Blohon. I thought both the approach to the matchup and how he wanted to play it, and then also his specific tactical sequencing and management of his resources there, both spot on.
Yeah, that was great. Carvalho did what he could, but his draw was fairly, vanilla in the sense that he could just pretty much attack with ground creatures and put power and toughness onto the board. He didn't have the interaction that he needed to protect himself against the combo or to kill the Saheeli Rai at the first sign of trouble. So he's going to be hoping for a little more interaction after sideboarding. He does get some good stuff to improve his chances of protecting against the combo.
Yeah, both of these decks kind of go into a similar path post-board where they become soups of early interaction and some top end. Carvalho has to make some concessions to his deck because he's got to be worried about the combo. Blohon has to make some concessions with the way that he sideboards to make sure he doesn't get run out of the gates on a 1-2-3 beatdown draw. But these decks kind of meet somewhere in the middle post-board, which is interesting because game one, the Vehicles deck is very aggressive and trying to win the game pretty quickly. The 4-color Copycat deck is trying to leverage a lot of card advantage and card drawing. And they, again, kind of settle into the middle of that in the post-board games.
Okay, we experienced a bug in the game. They're gonna restart the match and reconfigure to the same state in the match that they had been on. Um, but yeah, the dynamic certainly changes a lot after sideboarding, and we got a sneak peek at the way that players are gonna be sideboarding once they get the match started again. Um, Now, Joshua Layton in his interview pointed out the main difference between Lukas Blohon's four-color Saheeli deck and Ryusuke Arase, who we saw in the previous match, which is that Blohon is very well prepared to kill artifacts after sideboarding with 3 Release the Gremlins and 1 Natural State. Do you think there's anything Márcio can reasonably do to mitigate the damage of those cards?
I mean, he can get away from his artifacts up to a point. We saw some players over the course of the tournament board out maybe 1 copy of Heart of Kirin in the really long matchups because the legendary drawback comes into play when the game goes on for a very long time. He can hedge a little bit, but fundamentally, I don't think he can get away from his artifacts altogether. And also, if you're boarding into more flyers and more of a battlefield presence, even if you get released, let's say for 2, that's not necessarily the end of the world. With Gideon emblems, with first striking creatures, and with flyers, you still might be able to brawl. So I don't think you can go so deep in your sideboarding that you're cutting all of your artifacts to try to hedge against these release the gremlins.
Yeah, I think so too. The flying vehicles in particular just become so important against an opponent trying to stick planeswalkers. We saw in that first game basically that having only creatures that can attack on the ground and being unable to snipe the Saheeli Rai when it first came out was sort of the deciding factor in this game. So if Márcio was to try to overthink things and take out of his Heart of Kirin's, it might wind up just doing more damage than it's worth.
Right. I mean, when I've watched this deck lose this matchup from the Mardu vehicle side, it's usually the copycat deck through some mixture of removal and blockers locks up the ground. You don't have a powerful, expensive card. You can't really lean on your planeswalkers because you're behind on the board or you have nothing in the air. And if you don't have any flyers, that's kind of just the whole game right there. So even if some of these flyers come with some liabilities in being expensive and being legendary and drawing multiple copies being inefficient, a spot where vehicles regularly loses in this matchup is just not having access to enough flyers and the ground getting locked up. So you got to protect yourself against that outcome.
Hey, one thing that I'm loving here is that we just saw 2 great players play this same matchup, and now we're seeing a new set of competitors take on the same challenge, and they're approaching it very differently. I'm seeing on both sides of the matchup differences from the way our competitors handled it in the first semifinals. For example, Blohon is keeping in his Tamiyo Field Researcher while he's taking out his Chandra Torch of Defiance. Mm-hmm. He's also, you had talked a little bit about the pros and cons of negate in this matchup. I think I'm right with you that in a matchup where you really don't want to miss a beat, having a situational reactive card like that can really punish you if things aren't breaking the way you need them to. So Blohon electing not to board a negate, especially not for this game when he's on the draw. Márcio, on the other hand, not keeping in the full 4 Gideons and diversifying a little bit with his own Chandra Torch of Defiance.
And you saw the Gideons there in game 1 were not very effective. Now, setting aside that he drew a bunch of copies, and that's not good usually, he was just not able to manage the battlefield efficiently with them. And so he wants a little bit of that action, but especially boarding in as many 4s and 5s as he is, something's got to go at a certain point.
Both players with pretty strong opening hands here.
Carvalho's hand's just about perfect. He had to play a Vent on turn 1, so he missed the 3-bit Inspector. But his hand goes 1, 2, 3 with some card advantage, with some interaction, and a powerful payoff in the top if things drag out. So just a great opening 7 here. Blohon here, the colored mana situation is a little sketchy, but also a solid hand of early plays and interaction.
Yeah, this is pretty much exactly the way both players want things to go. Carvalho probably crossing his fingers here that Thalia Heretic Cathar goes unanswered because it is just so strong against the 4-color Saheeli deck when it stays in play. But he knows also that there are a lot of removal spells that take care of it, so he won't be too devastated to see eat a Harness Lightning here.
Yeah, and it's disruptive one way or the other. If Blohon actually can't cast the Whirler Virtuoso this turn because both of his sources of blue mana would enter the battlefield tapped due to the Thalia. So he kind of has to sort of take a turn off or play a little bit of inefficient magic here. And so even though the Thalia just died at seemingly a disadvantage mana-wise, still pretty disruptive there.
Absolutely. So 2 3-win inspectors come down. No good target for a natural state.
But great looking hand here for Carvalho. Some stuff going on. The artifact synergy stuff is unlocked because of the clues. He's got a form of interaction and a really powerful payoff potentially next turn with the Sky Sovereign.
Yeah, he would love to find a 5th untapped land here, and just slam the Sky Sovereign, kill the Whirler Virtuoso, and be able to keep attacking. And it looks like he finds it.
Yeah, great draw there. A lot of his lands don't enter the battlefield untap on this spot because Inspiring Advantage and Concealed Courtyard have passed. But he found a Spire of Industry, and now he is really rolling here.
And now Blohon needs to draw his sideboard card to keep pace and release the Gremlins. That would stabilize the board, but I think anything short of that is going to leave him in a pretty bad position.
Especially with Carvalho's leftover here being unlicensed disintegration, so it's not even realistic for Blohon here to just spike the combo and be able to steal the game that way. That's probably off the table here. So a great opening hand from Carvalho. In this matchup, you want a mixture of stuff to do early, stuff to do in the middle, and then some interaction and payoffs at the end. And his hand had all of it. And with the Shambling Vent there, even Crew 3 he has access to kind of invisibly. So great stuff.
Yeah, you bring up a great point that one of the sort of Hail Mary approaches to beating a Sky Sovereign is to hope your opponent runs out of creatures, but the creature lands on Carvalho's side change the equation.
Yep.
Wow, Archangel Avacyn.
Yeah, I was getting interested in all these little synergies of the artifact making the black mana for the Spire, which turns on the Shambling Vent, which allows the crew, et cetera, all these little interlocking pieces. But Archangel Avacyn also exciting in her own way. Carvalho actually has to slow down a little bit, kind of an embarrassment of riches situation where I think he was happy to just use Sky Sovereign that turn, but now he's found something a little bit better to do.
Well, we are getting to that crucial 6 mana stage from the 4-color copycat side of the table where both pieces of the combo can come down in the same turn and kill out of nowhere. So this works out really perfectly for Márcio, where he can pass the turn with 5 mana open to have a great play at the end of the turn in Archangel Avacyn, but also unlicensed disintegration as insurance in case anything goes wrong.
And Blohon knows that he's in a really bad spot now because Carvalho had the ability to turn on the Sky Sovereign and shoot down a creature and attack for a bunch of damage. If he's not electing not to do that, it's because he has some piece of interaction and a flash creature most likely, because it's hard to just sit on the one removal spell here, even if that's all you had. So Blohon knows he's dealing against 2 live cards right now. There's no other way that Carvalho would have passed unless both of his cards in hand were active.
Yeah, so if you're on Blohon's side of the table, do you sort of just hope hope that there's nothing and try to win? Or do you take a longer run approach and try to fight through this great stuff that Márcio has?
Well, I kind of like going for it here from Blohon's side because the rest of his hand doesn't really line up against Sky Sovereign. It's not clear he can really win the late game. And he might die too quickly to say, well, I've got a bunch of draw steps towards release the Gremlins. So even though the writing's on the wall that it's probably not good, there's a chance that Carvalho is bluffing or something else is going on here, especially facing down 2 clues. Carvalho is also going to get to draw a bunch of cards too and find more interaction. So this is a low percentage spot to go for it, but I don't think it's going to get much better than this.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key. Is it's not getting any better. You're just gonna, you can't even put your Saheeli into play ahead of time because the Sky Sovereign's so great at taking down planeswalkers. So you're sort of just spinning your wheels, waiting for something to happen. But nothing's going to happen that's going to make Carvalho not have it if he has it now.
Yep. Especially because he's got the clues in play too. It's very efficient for him to sit back and say go and play very reactive and then do things with his mana if you don't cooperate. And he's drawing cards and finding more ways to interact with you. So I think Blohon thought it was unlikely that he would be able to win the game in that spot, but I doubt his circumstances are getting much better.
All right, so a Serra Angel coming down at sorcery speed here, but that looks to be plenty good enough.
The only other thing that Blohon, I think, could have tried to do in that spot is blink out the Rogue Refiner. That might be enough to induce some removal, and if you can get the removal spell to be used on the Rogue Refiner instead of the Felidar Guardian, maybe there's a chance to combo out down the line, but I think that's a lower percentage play than just hoping that Carvalho has nothing, is representing interaction, and you can steal the game.
Yeah, you make a good point. That may have worked, except that Márcio sort of had it all, and just letting that happen and playing Avacyn is probably an acceptable exchange from his perspective.
There will be something comforting with Blohon if and when he chooses to go back and watch this game. We'll know that there is nothing he could have done differently to avoid the outcome that is in front of him right now.
So Lucas pretty much has no choice here except to prevent 1 damage by blocking a Thraben Inspector, take 7, and hope for a big draw step.
Yeah, he couldn't even chump block if he wanted to.
So I guess he has to start one at a time, picking away these big threats, like something like a Chandra to deal with Archangel Avacyn, or a Release the Gremlins to kill the Sky Sovereign and Clue token and stabilize the ground a little bit would be a good start, but it's really going to take multiple cards in a row.
Exactly. He needs to find some form of artifact removal and then a Harness Lightning or something else to answer the Archangel Avacyn. I think, Whirler Virtuoso is probably a better draw than most right here, as it gives him a little bit of breathing room, but long term, that's not really an answer either. He's still sitting on 6 energy, so Whirler Virtuoso gets him up to 9. He has some amount of chump blocking there, and that might yield multiple draw steps down the line. But he's got to piece it together really soon because he's taking 11 this turn and falling to 7, so essentially facing lethal next turn if he doesn't find some piece of interaction.
Patrick, let me ask you from a big picture standpoint, have you ever covered a series of matches this long between 2 competitors where it's going to be best 2 out of 3 matches of best 2 out of 3 games for a potential of as many as 9 games in a row?
So I have covered some finals that were split formats, 2 out of 3 matches, but let's say it's Standard, Modern, and Legacy. I've done some of that. What I find compelling about this is there's so much room for maneuvering. Dave Williams in the previous semifinal match alluded to the cat and mouse game, and because particularly from the Saheeli Rai side of things, you can board out the combo altogether and become a value deck, or you can try to lean more heavily on the combo. It makes, how do you manage the sideboard? My opponent did this last game, maybe play versus draw, they changed something. Maybe they want me to bring in a lot of removal for the combo, and I've sideboarded in such a way that that's not really what the game is going to be about. There is something compelling about allowing these players to go back to the well in a matchup that is kind of this cagey, allows for this level of interaction and counterplay.
It's so different from the way we normally play Magic. Speaking from personal experience, I tend to be a very structured player. I love the good, clean feeling of being like, this is my sideboard plan for the matchup. I've determined that this is best. Let me close the book, and that's what I'm going to do every time. But and usually that works when you're facing a different opponent every round of a Grand Prix. You only play 1 or 2 sideboard games. They don't really have a chance to learn what you're all about. But in a matchup like this, you hurt yourself by being too predictable. And at a certain point, even if you've identified the best strategy, there might be some value in intentionally doing something different.
So Blohon here back to the action with a pretty cooperative draw step here in Release the Gremlins.
Yeah, we mentioned this as step one. He even gets to kill the clue token for a little needle there and stabilizes the ground, but it's still this very dangerous Archangel Avacyn that he has to contend with, and even makes it difficult for him to block the Thraben Inspectors.
You see attack here from Carvalho, happy to offer up the Thraben Inspectors, as that will cause Archangel Avacyn to flip, and that's good news for Carvalho as well.
Yeah, now, if Blohon chooses not to block the Thraben Inspectors, would you ever consider shocking your own creature?
I consider that all the time. I think, if it's not actually lethal this turn, and you're not at risk of getting comboed out, you can probably just hold tight. But that was the first thing my mind went to when he picked up the shock was, how can I use this profitably on one of my own creatures? But yeah, I think Carvalho's position is good enough here that there's no reason to do anything too fancy. That play will present itself next turn. The shock is also interaction against the combo, so there's no reason to push on that.
We may see it if Blohon cleans himself out of cards here, plays the Whirler Virtuoso, which, of course, under ordinary circumstances would represent flying blockers for the Avacyn. But if he plays both of his spells and is left with 0 cards, then Márcio has complete information and the kill on board if he can transform his own Archangel Avacyn.
Yep. And Blohon here has an incentive to empty out because he wants the 2 energy from Attune with the Ether. Assuming he gets extra turns, it's just more efficient. So not realistic for him to leave the Attune with Ether back in the chamber. So now all the information's on the table, and we should be going to game 3 here in a moment.
Yeah, the only question remaining is if Márcio sees the play.
Márcio has not missed much in watching him and covering him over the course of this tournament.
Yeah, he's not the type to miss much.
Can you do it on the Scrounger and get it back?
It would
no,
die.
I guess he's kind of short. This is better.
Yeah. So Blohon, of course, could make a Thopter with Whirler Virtuoso, but he either has to do it before the Archangel Avacyn triggers, or it'll be too late. The Virtuoso will be dead, and that's going to be the game.
Yeah, and that's another instance. We've been watching a lot of it, certainly through the semifinals thus far and throughout the course of the tournament, where the situation looked pretty good for the Saheeli Rai deck. The card advantage engine was going, life total was relatively high, but Archangel Avacyn was just uniquely problematic, and Carvalho was able to leverage that largely into the Game 2 win.
I especially love that it's sort of a trump to the cards that people are bringing in to trump the normal game plan of Mardu vehicles. Against an opponent with 3 copies of Release the Gremlins, Sky Sovereign is like, okay, I'll bring it in because I have it, but Archangel Avacyn is exactly what you want. Exactly what you want.
And you can see the way the artifacts are kind of set up here on Carvalho's side. They either are very cheap, they're recursive, or they're getting something the minute they show up, or have the potential to, like Sky Sovereign and Walking Ballista. That's sort of the natural way to hedge a little bit against Release the Gremlins, is just have cards that either play underneath of it, or even if they get tagged, it's not the end of the world. The only real exception to that is the Cultivator's Caravans. But when Carvalho is signing up to so many 4s and 5s, that's probably just a necessary evil.
I think so too. Now on Blohon's side of the table, it was just some small changes. He cut his 4th copy of Saheeli Rai, Servant of the Conduit, and Whirler Virtuoso, and he brought in 2 negates and Tireless Tracker. I guess that just being a play-draw thing. We saw Ryusuke Urase do the same thing with negates on the play, but not on the draw.
Yeah, we've seen these Saheeli Rai players throughout the tournament do some shaving in these long games because a lot of these energy threats are on diminishing returns. The first one does a lot for you. The second one, not so much. And if you think the game's going to go on for a long time, it's an easy way to free up some sideboard slots. We've seen even Whirler Virtuoso. I covered a match where one of the competitors went down from 4 to 3. that feels like one of the better cards in the matchup from the Saheeli side of things from what I've been watching. But still, the belief that the game will go on long enough that you will start running into these diminishing return issues has led a lot of these competitors to do shaving like that.
Looks like excellent hands from both players yet again.
Mm-hmm.
Márcio has Fatal Push in his deck post sideboard, which Josh Utter-Leyton in his interview explained that that's a card he's not thrilled with, but maybe something that you consider when on the draw, especially if there aren't other great options.
And it's going to be great here as you see the Servant of the Conduit. So now Carvalho's got to make that decision between if he wants to be Fatal Pushing or casting the Scrounger this turn, and just wants to keep Blohon off of his mana creature.
Top of Márcio's library has not been particularly great to him so far, as he's only drawn lands since the early turns, but he still has the pieces in place if he can draw well from here to continue putting the pressure on.
Although you can see why, again, the Flyers are such a premium in this matchup. Look at Blohon's hand here. Already played a 2-for-1 ground blocker. He's got Feldar Guardian plus Rogue Refiner. Trying to do all this work on the ground is extremely challenging, even if you go, 1-drop removal spell on your mana creature, 2-drop with a removal spell left over. It feels already like we've hit the point where Carvalho has to start getting to his Flyers or Planeswalkers to make any sort of inroads on the board.
Yeah, the last thing you want to get into against the Saheeli deck is just trading against the Rogue Refiners and giving them a 2-for-1 card advantage with each exchange, while also just giving them plenty of time to do their thing and deploy their more powerful cards.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that the 2-for-1s themselves are the end of the world, but when the 2-for-1 also costs a lot of investment of mana or inefficiency on the vehicle side, that's where you really start to get buried in those transactions. And from there, the Saheeli Ride decks can kind of mop you up with whatever, the combo or just additional value.
Oath of Nissa found a Spirebluff Canal, so Lucas will now decide whether he wants to play out a Rogue Refiner or pass with Harness Lightning and Negate mana available.
I have to imagine he just passes here out of respect for a Planeswalker.
Yeah, so he'll have to take the combat damage and then perhaps use Harness Lightning at the end of the turn if that's what he decides to do.
If he wants to. I think the tipping point where there's no question about it that you just leave up the 2 mana is that he has land number 5 in hand already rolled up. So even if Carvalho doesn't cooperate this turn and doesn't allow Blohon to cast the Negate, he can untap, cast the Rogue Refiner, and still leave up the 2 mana. Blohon already has all that information. So at that point, leaving up the Negate is very easy. So
Veteran Motorist is pretty decent to find off the clue here, because when he's already got as many lands as he needs, he really just wants to scry to action.
The scry's a premium, although both of the threats that Carvalho had on the battlefield were kind of mopey to use a removal spell on. Thraben Inspector is not very good, and the Scrounger can come back. So in some ways, it does cooperate with Blohon's hand here, as now he gets to use the Harness Lightning on a real card.
Yeah, there could have been some consideration there, given that Blohon's in a pretty safe spot, to saving Harness Lightning as an answer to Archangel Avacyn. His now one remaining reactive card is Negate, and having lost to the Archangel Avacyn the previous game, there's got to be some worry.
So I think he definitely would have run takebacks on that play if he knew that Warlord Virtuoso was coming off the top, as that so effectively manages the game. But his hand at the time was a Feldar Guardian he can't cast, another Rogue Refiner. It looked like one way or the other that Veteran Motorist was going to trade for a real card. So,
perfect to negate this here.
And look at the leftovers here with the Whirler Virtuoso, and take a little look over at Blohon's life total. That's 10 energy. They'll spike up to 13, and that's just a ton. At this point, he might even have Archangel Avacyn just beat straight up because he can go so wide in the air.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for Marcio. He's got a low life total and so many creatures to contend with on the opposite side of the battlefield. Unlicensed Disintegration is great for racing, but when you can only kill one of your opponent's 7 creatures, it's not the best.
Yep. Marcio here resolving the scry. Imagine we will see an Unlicensed Disintegration here in a moment. Oh, looks like he's going through. Let him go through.
And Blohon didn't make any Thopters at the end of the turn.
It's interesting. Curious what motivated that. I guess it probably isn't an Archangel Avacyn consideration because there's no real way to finagle when the counters are coming off.
Yeah, he wouldn't have had exactly a lethal attack until he drew this Oath of Chandra, but certainly seems like a spot where he wants to keep the pressure on Marcio's life total.
Yeah, this seems like a fairly easy spot here. He can, if he wants to, he can kill the 2 eligible blockers. Could also just leave the Thayrid Inspector and use the Felidor Guardian to reset an Oath of Nissa if he wants him to look at a card, and then use the Whirler Virtuoso Thopter tokens to gum up the Scrounger and any other follow-up Carvalho could have. And it looks, yeah, Blohon's just trying to apply as much pressure as possible this turn, just clearing out the 2 blockers.
Is there any single card that Marcio can draw to get out of this?
Well, this makes him fall to 6. I mean, hypothetically, Blohon is still dead to card in hand is Unlicensed Disintegration, and Draw Step is Unlicensed Disintegration. But I think with the last card in hand not being live, there's no draws for Carvalho.
Okay, so Lukas Blohon is going to take the first match. In the previous semifinals, we saw Mardu Vehicles, after playing a bunch of close games, granted, win both matches 2-0. Sorry, win the set 2 matches to 0. But this time, 4-color Copycat takes the first one down.
And I think I do think the veteran motorists are an issue for Carvalho in the matchup. They just there's going to be some draws where he gets out of the gate, fixes his draw, gets the crew, et cetera, et cetera. But if he's leaning on that card to line up the right way in combat, it's a really tough way to do it against Rogue Refiner and Whirler Virtuoso and all those kind of cards. So we saw there, there's a couple spots where veteran motorist was the draw step once we got to turn 5 or 6. And that card wasn't really worth a whole lot more than Scry 2 for 2 mana.
Yeah, you're right. If it comes down on turn 2 on the play, it can get in, at least 1 attack before the 3 mana creatures start coming down. But particularly when you're on the draw, you play the Motorist, they play the Rogue Refiner. That's an extremely poor exchange. And when the artifact removal comes in to make even crewing Heart of Kirin not as reliable of a game plan, the Motorist does lose a lot of value.
Yeah, it feels like post-board there's enough removal floating around these decks that your cards just get broken up a lot. So the more that you're leaning on synergies, the more likely it is that a shock or release the gremlins is really problematic. Post-board, it feels like you want to have a lot of individually impactful cards like Planeswalkers, Sky Sovereigns, Archangel Avacyns. Keep some of the lower base because you have to have some cheap stuff to do, but you want all the cards that are kind of just pull their own weight on their own because the 4 colors Saheeli deck becomes very efficient at breaking up synergies.
All right, Patrick, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back for match number 2.
Great.
I'm Mark Rosewater. I'm 49. I'm the head designer for Magic the Gathering, and I love playing and making Magic.
When did you first start playing Magic?
Back in 1993, in the summer of 1993, when this game first came out.
What did you want to be when you were a child?
What did I want to be? I wanted to grow up and write television shows.
What is your favorite color, shard or guild?
My favorite guild is Izzet. My favorite shard is Esper, and my favorite Wedge is just white, blue, red. Is not Ojitai. Is Jeskai.
What is your favorite 90s jam?
My favorite 90s jam? I don't like jam, so... No, music you're talking about. Favorite 90s... Wow, I don't know. That's I don't know. I have to name a band in the 90s. Hall & Oates. I don't know who's in the 90s.
How do you define success and how do you measure it?
How do I define success? Success is doing what you love.
And how do you measure it?
Are you happy?
What is your proudest moment playing Magic?
My proudest moment playing Magic was winning the championship with Aaron Forsythe and Richard Garfield against the championship Japanese team at the Worlds, in which Japan won everything but that event.
What were you like in high school?
I was very geeky in high school, very similarly to how I am now.
What is your guilty pleasure food?
What is my guilty pleasure food? I do not feel guilty eating, so I don't have one. But I eat a lot of junk food.
And what is something that's true that almost no one agrees with you on?
Something that's true that people don't agree with me on. Something that's true that people don't agree with me on. That Star Wars is the better movie between it and Empire Strikes Back.
All right, thank you very much.
Welcome back. Lukas Blohon and his 4-color copycat deck have taken the first match in a set of potentially 3 matches. We're about to start number 2 between Lukas Blohon and Márcio Carvalho.
I really enjoy watching this matchup a lot. What's fascinating me about it is, the Mardu Vehicles deck is the beatdown deck. It's playing with 1 and 2 drops that are focused on attacking. And the Saheeli Rai deck is the control deck. It sits down and draws a bunch of extra cards and uses a removal spell and wins some long games. But we've watched games where Mardu Vehicles has lost seemingly very early on in the game. Not necessarily the combo, but just the board got locked up and that was it. The game was determined very early on. We've also seen some games where the Saheeli Rai deck has gone to turn 8 or turn 9 and then lost because something like Sky Sovereign, Archangel Avacyn, or Walking Ballista sort of stole the game out of nowhere. So it's cool to watch a matchup where, you have an aggressive deck and a control deck, but the aggressive deck isn't necessarily beat if the game goes long. The control deck can win the short game sometimes, and both players just kind of have to read and respond to what they have in their hand and what's happening on the battlefield.
All right, we're going to go down to the match. Okay, here we are. So as the loser of the first match, Márcio Carvalho gets to play first, but it looks like he has a hand that he's going to have to take a mulligan.
Yes, this is no land, so this is an easy one. Blohon's hand lands and spells, and Ether Hub plus another energy outsource has some amount of mana fixing. Notha Chandra he can cast without any difficulty. I think that's an easy keep.
Yeah, it looks good for him. Much better hand for Márcio. The only thing that's not perfect about it is that he can't play Toolcraft Exemplar on turn 1. Both of his, effective sources of white mana are on delay here in Needle Spires and Spire of Industry.
Yeah, and that's a really painful one to miss on 1, because if we're going to turn 4 before he can cast it, let's say he curves Veteran Motorist into Pia Nalar, by that point a 3/2 is probably worth very little against a deck that's so efficient at blocking like the Copycat deck.
Yeah, you had talked about the pain of Veteran Motorist having to trade against the ground creatures of 4-color Copycat, and that problem is even worse with a Toolcraft Exemplar that's not coming down on the first turn of the game.
Yep. And remember, this is game 1. We reset the match here when we go back. So Carvalho is playing now without his sideboard and is not really as well set up to play a deeper game as he is post-board. So a mulligan on the play, potentially his early aggression blunted. That's just going to be a hard game for him to win.
Yeah, you see Lucas here thinking carefully about which land to play on turn 1. Ether Hub is, it's a good habit to get into to play your non-basic lands earlier rather than later against a potential Thalia, Heretic Cathar. I believe Márcio only has his Thalias in the sideboard, but Lucas just wants to develop his mana in the cleanest way possible in the early turns, which is why he's given a little extra thought to what lands he wants to play.
Yep, even on turn 1, it's pretty complicated.
Márcio's 6-card hand developing well as he's found, a fourth source of untapped mana. He has access to all his colors, and Archangel Avacyn, which the one card potentially that can allow the Mardu Vehicles deck to go a little later and still be competitive against 4-color Saheeli.
Yeah, these have been some really nice draw sets for Carvalho here. Some pressure in the air, something to do later on if the game goes a bit deeper and he finds land number 5. So good set of draws there.
Blohon has a handful of choices. You could deploy either of his 2 Planeswalkers and could realistically choose from either of their abilities once he gets to that point. Of course, neither one is going to be particularly safe against Heart of Kiran and Thopter token threatening the Planeswalkers, but he could just cash them in for a little bit of value, either by copying Rogue Refiner or killing potentially Pia Nalar, whatever he decides is Márcio's best creature.
Yeah, and you can see that Carvalho getting off to a fairly aggressive start with some action in the air takes a lot of the sting out of Blohon's Planeswalkers. Any of the line that he takes here with Saheeli Rai or Chandra is pretty mopey. He's either going up for minimal value and losing it into the air, or killing a creature, no matter what he kills, of not very much consequence here. I think with the second Saheeli Rai in hand, I think there's even an argument for just resetting the Rogue Refiner, because I think there's just not a whole lot to do with Chandra in this spot that's productive. And with the second Saheeli Rai in the hand, you still have the ability to combo out down the line should that come up.
Yeah, the only problem with that line of play is that it's really doesn't add to his board presence. It doesn't do anything to regain parity on the board. I almost, even though it's so inefficient and ugly, I almost would consider just using, Chandra as a 1-for-1 removal spell against one of the ground creatures.
I think there's even an argument for just playing Servant of the Conduit and passing and hoping to pick a better spot with one of these Planeswalkers down the line. It's not like Blohon's likely to be bottlenecked on mana, so hopefully a better threat presents itself. But I think Chandra on any of these threats right now is just, I don't think you're squeezing enough out. And there's a good chance Carvalho produces a better target for that somewhere down the line. Or if you draw a removal spell, then you might be able to get in a position where you protect your Chandra, and then things start getting really good.
Yeah, that would be great. For now, Lukas Blohon choosing between a set of pretty unexciting options.
Yep. I think that Chandra's floor is high enough that you don't need to fire one off here. I can respect Servant of the Conduit, and thinking about it more, that's probably where I would go this turn. If you wanted to Saheeli Rai for a card, I think that's also acceptable. But I'm curious what Blohon's going to do here. It looks like he's going to Chandra.
Yeah, part of the logic is that, the game is not that likely to go long enough for you to profitably deploy both Chandras. And with, just the cards he has access to, at least the saving grace that he can cast 2 of them next turn if he keeps the Servant of the Conduit. So while this is pretty bad, a 4-mana mythic rare planeswalker killing a Thopter token and dying, that as bad as it gets, it, at least better than dying with a handful of cards that you never got to use.
For sure. I guess my counter to that would be, I think the game will go on long enough where he could have done something with the second Chandra, even if he failed to play one the previous turn.
Yeah, we'll see how it develops from here. Márcio, on the other hand, has as weak a turn as he could have, as he just draws another copy of Heart of Kiran that he actually can't use. So he's short of activating his creature land, can't attack on the ground, can't play a 5th land for Archangel Avacyn. A sigh of relief from Lukas Blohon.
Yep.
The good news for Lukas Blohon fans is that he's setting himself up to win the game on the spot if he finds Felidar Guardian. He now has access to 7 mana, which is enough to play both pieces of the combo in the same turn. Although Márcio counters as soon as I say so by drawing Unlicensed Disintegration.
The other positive thing here for Blohon is he set himself up where if he finds Whirler Virtuoso, it's a huge draw. It's got a lot of energy and nothing else in play really taxing it.
Did Márcio decline to attack with Heart of Kiran that turn?
I believe he did.
I guess he
if he
needs
feels
to
he has to
defend
leave up,
himself.
yeah, if he feels like he has to leave up Unlicensed Disintegration out of respect for the combo, or just whatever else happening on the table, it's possible that he's behind on the damage race. Also, from Carvalho's perspective, if I'm sitting here with Unlicensed Disintegration and drawing to land number 5 for Archangel Avacyn, I don't need to race. He might actually feel like the middle game favors him here, even though his deck is theoretically the more aggressive of the two.
Yeah, very interesting turn of events here.
It's hard for things to go too wrong, and a draw of a land puts you in a great position. So why play a short game if you think, the next 2 or 3 turns are where you're going to try to swing the game around? Blohon here resolving the Oath of Nissa. We'll know what card he takes momentarily.
Yeah, so he's looking for Felidar Guardian, though, no guarantee that he would go for it right away. A Planeswalker like Tamiyo Field Researcher is pretty impressive on this stable board, particularly because Tamiyo can protect herself by tapping down Heart of Kiran.
Yeah, Tamiyo, super flexible in games like this, where either you can use it to accrue card advantage or shut the door very quickly with back-to-back turns of minusing.
Yeah, and Lukas can threaten a big attack here. Márcio can, of course, defend himself and kill Tamiyo with the Unlicensed Disintegration, but then we have a situation where the game's going to continue a long time, and Lukas Blohon wins on the spot if he finds Felidar Guardian.
I have to imagine Carvalho's got to cast this Unlicensed Disintegration. There's just too much bad stuff happening on the table now that he can't afford to clutch this, hoping to break up the combo.
Right, and he's really hoping to hit a 5th untapped land anyway and spend his mana on Archangel Avacyn. So it's not as though he can play the rest of the game with 3 mana untapped for Unlicensed Disintegration.
Right.
Gideon's a great draw here.
Yep. Gideon, the game's being played. It's a grind fest on the ground, and that's where Gideon's often at his best. And still, Blohon just short of a Feldar Guardian to be able to end this thing on the spot.
And I like that Márcio didn't attack with the Toolcraft Exemplar there. It's tempting for 2 reasons. One, I mean, just 3 damage in your aggressive deck is not something you want to miss out on. Also, it doesn't profitably block the Servant of the Conduit, but he should expect another removal spell. Potentially Chandra's Torch of Defiance makes a lot of sense, and he doesn't want to lose the Gideon as it's his main threat that's on the battlefield right now, and he'd be happy to chump block with Toolcraft Exemplar in order to keep it.
Yeah, and Carvalho has also shown with the line the previous turn, or 2 turns ago rather, with not attacking with the Heart of Kirin, that I think he feels he's advantaged if this game really grinds down to a halt because of the Archangel Avacyn in hand. Gideon further cements that. If the game slows down, he doesn't get comboed out. That's another great resource to play a game like this. So once you've already decided, I'm kind of backing off the damage race here, then I think it makes a lot of sense to hold back with the Toolcraft Exemplar. So also look at the life totals. I mean, it's 19-9 right now. Marcio's way behind. So a little bit of defense I think is called for here no matter what.
I think so too. Now it becomes very relevant here that Márcio did kill the Rogue Refiner last turn, because otherwise a great play for Blohon would be to copy Rogue Refiner and send all the creatures at Gideon. But now, copying Servant of the Conduit as an extra attacker, but losing the Saheeli on the crackback, it's not so good. We might just see him kill the Night Token and attack Gideon with both Force the Chump block on Toolcraft Exemplar.
Well, once he plays the Chandra here and clears out a blocker, I think Gideon's out of here no matter what, because he has the Oath of Chandra on the table as well. He can redirect the 2 damage to Gideon at the end of the turn, and one of the Servant of Conduits connects. Yeah, I think Blohon's just going to force the issue here.
So he had a couple alternatives there. One would have been just to attack with both servants before combat, or before playing the Chandra, and if Márcio double blocks, he loses both creatures, and post combat you can play Chandra and plus. It's not particularly better because the Heart of Kirin is liable to kill Chandra next turn anyway.
Yeah.
But it is something to think about. He also could have used it for mana, played Saheeli Rai and made a copy of Servant of the Conduit. But then, if things go horribly wrong, he might lose both Planeswalkers. So this seems like a relatively safe line. He's not going to be able to untap with Chandra, but at least he manages the board. Continues giving himself draw steps to find the combo.
And also, if he can just stay ahead on the table like this and force Carvalho to be attacking, that's also a route to just win the damage race. You don't even have to worry about it. And all the Saheeli Rise are worth a 0.2, plus there's an Oath of Chandra on the table, so all that adds up. I mean, even if Blohon doesn't have access to the combo, he might be able to just burn out Carvalho from here. Yeah,
Patrick, he's ignoring the Gideon. He's just going straight at Marcio's life total.
Yeah, and I think the 2 Saheeli Rise in hand plus the Oath of Chandra is just, all right, it's 19-5, and all I need to do is get these to resolve, and that's game. This has been these Saheeli Rai decks are pretty fascinating. We have not watched a whole lot of comboing out on turn 4. It's a multi-dimensional deck. Sometimes the combo happens to show up, and that's great. But this deck is definitely not leaning on the combo to make everything work.
Yeah, and you pointed out that there's been several games where it's the Mardu Vehicles player who has to protect his life total. In game 3 of the first match, Lucas won with an army of Thopter tokens against Márcio, who couldn't protect himself with Scrap Heap Scroungers. This time, it's the Oath of Chandra combining with Planeswalkers and a couple good attack steps that has Márcio, near death here.
So it looks like Márcio doing what he can here, dialing up an attack with Pia and Hart, pumping Hart a little bit.
Man, I have to say, Márcio has had a series of unfortunate draw steps in this game. From the point where he had 4 lands in play and an Archangel Avacyn, he's just drawn no 5th land, several cards that he can't even cast. The game has really slipped away from him.
Yeah, I think Carvalho did a very nice job of setting the game up into the position that I think you try to get to in some of these slogs, where if I draw a land, it's good, and if I draw a spell, it's good. And he's unfortunately just hit a couple of the spells in his deck that aren't.
Yeah, so this game is over. As you mentioned, the trigger off Oath of Chandra has Márcio effectively at 3 life and 2 activations of Saheeli Rai against only 2 blockers on defense. We'll have Lukas Blohon taking the first game.
This is kind of a weird one. You don't expect the backdoor burnout here to be the way this matchup plays out, but there it is.
Okay, so Márcio Carvalho with his back against the wall, he'll have to win 4 games if he wants to continue playing in this tournament.
Yeah, he's got to pick up 2 in a row here, and then 2 out of the next 3 should he get to that point.
The good news is it does seem that things get a little better for him after sideboard. I guess that's a debatable point because Release the Gremlins is so potent, but his weakness to the combo in game 1 does not persist into the post-board games when he brings in Walking Ballista and Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Sorry,
yeah,
Heretic Cathar.
Those are 2 threats that are just kind of fine on rate, and also happen to incidentally break up the combo. It's very rare that those cards kind of just win the game by themselves, because there's so much interaction in the Saheeli Rai deck, but the opportunity cost is very low. And, we've seen these games really drag out where a random threat off the top has come into play and stuck the whole time. And Walking Ballista and Thalia are great if those happen to be the threats.
Definitely.
And I think you're seeing some play versus draw type of sideboarding going on from Blohon's side here. You can see the Chandra's going to the sideboard right now, and we saw Chandra, I would argue, underperform the game we just watched. The threats on Carvalho's side were too interchangeable, and it was too hard for Blohon to protect Chandra. That question might get different on the play versus on the draw, but with Blohon on the draw, I think he's just not going to try to spend a lot of energy protecting Chandra.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this iterated game of these players playing a lot of sideboarded games in a row in these matches, and things changing and the players learning about what the opponents are doing and how they're playing. One thing I noticed here is that in the first match when Lukas was on the draw, he did not have Negate in his deck. And he has 1 now, even on the draw. The way I interpret that is that perhaps at the start of the match, he wasn't sure whether or not Márcio Carvalho was going to bring in Sky Sovereign. But after seeing that Márcio, that is a card that Márcio values, Lukas now is turning to Negate as a countermeasure.
Although it looks like Blohon split it there. It looks like he brought in 1 Negate and left 1 on the bench.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had mentioned earlier, the costs of overdoing it with a reactive card like that against a deck as punishing as Mardu, and I think Lukas realizes that he doesn't want to make his deck clunky or have the wrong card at the wrong time. All right, turn 2 Heart of Kiran for Carvalho. He does not have red mana, so Veteran Motorist might be a little ways off, but he can choose either Scrap Heap Scrounger or Toolcraft Exemplar if he wants to crew. And that's a great draw, finding untapped red mana here.
This is the first time that I've seen Carvalho play where he just kind of got the stereotypical Mardu vehicles beat down draw. The red mana was a little bit delayed here, but didn't end up impacting him much here, as I think he would have cast Heart of Kiran on 2 regardless. Now you see him with a lot of presence on the battlefield very early on, and Blohon's start here a little bit on the slow side with no interaction on the first or second turn.
Although just Release the Gremlins for 1, it's not the type of backbreaking play that we envision with this card, but it's just what the doctor ordered here. Just effectively Manic Vandal to deal with the flying vehicle and produce a blocker to stem the bleeding against the dwarves attacking on the ground.
Yeah, especially with the second copy of Release the Gremlins in hand, I think it's a no-brainer. Just a Manic Vandal looks great on this battlefield, and he's got plenty of resources to work with. He's got to defend himself in the short game right here, and getting out of the first couple turns without too much damage being dealt or falling too far behind the battlefield. Really, what he's up to right now.
So we're going to see him trade with one of these two creatures here.
And I like trading off with the Toolcraft Exemplar when you have a Whirler Virtuoso in your hand.
Yep, and Felidar Guardian as well.
Yep.
One toughness or one power blockers makes that decision make a lot of sense. Here, Felidar Guardian, I think, makes the most sense to me. You can blink Oath of Nissa looking for another land, and it's just the most powerful blocker. There's some argument to Whirler Virtuoso.
I'm a big fan here. I'm a big fan of here casting the Felidar Guardian because I think that he wants to just get to a point where he can cast 2 spells in one turn that can catch him back up in the game. If you cast the Whirler Virtuoso in your hand, you're down a 3-mana spell to pair with your Harness Lightning for the next turn. And the fact that it's an effective blocker and you get a card for your trouble as well, and likely land number 5. I like Blinking the Oath as well.
Yeah, it sounds perfect.
Yeah, I think there's an important when you're behind like this and no single play in your hand can catch you up to view the game from the perspective of what's my path to cast 2 spells in one turn. That's usually your route to stabilizing. And I think Felidar Guardian gives him the best shot of doing that. I think there would have been an argument for casting the Whirler Virtuoso the turn previous, but now with Walking Ballista in the equation, making it much more complicated to block with a Thopter, I would err towards the Felidar Guardian, as you initially mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. The Whirler Virtuoso does lose value as a blocker in the face of Walking Ballista.
Yeah, you could have talked me into it last turn, but now with Walking Ballista out there, I think it's a non-starter. I guess another line worth considering here is just release the Gremlins on the Ballista is just so mopey too.
Yeah, as long as one of his blocking creatures can neutralize a threat at a 1-for-1 level, he'd rather save to release the Gremlins for a bigger turn, a bigger swing later on.
And the Felidar Guardian is such an effective blocker on this battlefield too, because the Veteran Motorist is checked. And if he wants to attack, you can block the Walking Ballista for free. So if you want to, you can either take 3 from the Scrounger or swallow up his whole turn, putting a counter on the Ballista to finish off. So, yeah, for a number of reasons, Felidar Guardian seems like the thing to do.
I'll tell you what's going through Lukas Blohon's head here is he's trying to think of any way that he can stay in the game if Marcio's last card is Unlicensed Disintegration. And playing a blocker that gets Unlicensed Disintegration is going to have him taking a minimum of 10 damage and basically ruining any chance of him getting back in the game. But I think the bottom line and what he's going to eventually conclude is that he's just not winning if Marcio is Unlicensed Disintegration.
There's another consideration here also, which is the colored mana situation. If his plan, if the motivation to cast Felidar Guardian is largely get to 2 spells in one turn, he needs to find red mana specifically to cast Harness Lightning and then either 3, be it Release the Gremlins or Whirler Virtuoso. Furthermore, he can't cast the Felidar Guardian next turn based on what's on the table because he won't have any energy. So he might just, and I think this play is just motivated by the fact that he doesn't have white mana for next turn and he doesn't have double red. So it's just too risky for him to dig for a land because there's too many lands he can find that don't allow him to get to 5 mana next turn.
Well, he can sort of get double red through an indirect means by casting one of the red energy cards, saving 1 energy behind, and then using the Ether Hub. But white mana is definitely a concern. And actually, after all that, he did decide to go with Whirler Virtuoso. Perhaps this is, an attempt to try to have a chance against Unlicensed Disintegration.
And, if Carvalho is willing to make an attack here, he either has to lose the Walking Ballista to get rid of the Thopter, spend his whole turn dumping mana on the Walking Ballista to keep it around, or trade off with a Veteran Motorist. All of which are pretty reasonable outcomes from Blohon's side of things. There also could be an urge here to try to get the Ballista off the table and then try to direct the game into a place where you just shoot the moon with Release the Gremlins, where you swallow up nearly everything that's relevant. Yeah, that was a surprising play, but I guess Blohon feels that he's living Carvalho with a variety of pretty bad options, and there's no guarantee that the Felidar Guardian lines up his hand the right way to get to 5 mana the next turn and then do 2 things.
So Márcio says, okay, he's going to let the Thopter trade with Veteran Motorist. Blohon now thinking about whether or not he should trade Whirler Virtuoso for Scrapheap Scrounger, which is, of course, a reasonable play, protect his life total. But based on Marcio's exact hand, he would love it. He would love to make that trade and just spend 2 mana on 1-drop creatures and return the Scrapheap Scrounger at the end of the turn.
Yeah, what complicates things, I think, from Blohon's side here is Carvalho is allowing you to go to blocks. He's not dumping 4 mana into the Walking Ballista and finishing off your Thopter. That signals to Blohon that he's got something to do with his mana. That mana's at a premium this turn. So if you think you're setting him off of 2 turns of getting the Scrounger back, maybe it's worth also the block there. As it turns out, it would have been great for Carvalho because he was spending 2 mana and would have had the 2 mana left over. But I think that's why you saw the pause from Blohon. Carvalho was signaling that he really valued his mana that turn, and that makes it potentially more attractive to try to block and trade off with the Scrounger.
A 5th untapped land here means that Release the Gremlins is going to be a huge play. Now, keep in mind, even if Márcio uses the Ballista in response to, sort of get rid of one of the targets, Release the Gremlins doesn't say make a gremlin for each artifact you destroy. It's just X gremlins so long as the spell resolves, period. So he's going to get rid of both artifacts, get 2 gremlins, completely stabilize the board, and put Márcio in a position where he has to draw something in order to keep attacking. Right.
You announce whatever X is, and then on resolution, if at least one of them is around, you get X gremlins. That's why he couldn't fire off if he fires it off on just Walking Ballista, he gets no gremlins for his trouble, because there won't be any targets on resolution, assuming Carvalho sacrifices the Ballista. With a second target there, even if the Ballista isn't there on resolution, you still get the 2 gremlins.
And things slipping away from Márcio here. He's going to have to make some unfavorable trades against these gremlins, and just stuck with 2 tapped lands in hand.
And something I've really liked about Blohon's management of this game here, he has an energy left over. That means that the Harness Lightning in his hand can kill Archangel Avacyn. I imagine he will put this 1 energy at a premium here and not just, cast a Felidar Guardian unless he's planning on resetting the Aether Hub or the Whirler Virtuoso. Because having that 1 energy left over is a lot of protection here.
Great point. He could have gotten in an attack if he was going to do it that way. Not sure that there's much risk.
Well, the shambling bet on the table plus the Scrounger coming back. I think he's just – it is a very conservative no attack for sure, but I think he's just protecting his life total at all costs. His hand's very powerful. At 8, he's not totally safe against a deck that has things like Archangel Avacyn and Unlicensed Disintegration. We saw one come off the top here. So a very conservative no attack, but I think justifiable.
Specifically, what I mean is that he decided to blink the Whirler Virtuoso with Felidar Guardian, so he could have attacked and then sort of untapped it after combat.
Sure, yeah. That is very conservative. I think I would have gotten it. But I like, in general, holding back on D.
Agreed. All right, Unlicensed Disintegration. That's step 1 for Márcio to come back. And the factor that you just mentioned, Blohon is, presumably going to lose either his Virtuoso or his 3 energy here, meaning Harness Lightning can no longer take out Archangel Avacyn. Something he's certainly thinking about, but he might not have the luxury to manage things that way anymore.
Yeah, and Carvalho's empty-handed also, so you're not playing around an Archangel Avacyn in the hand just off the top.
Or are you?
Wow. Oh, that is some discipline. Now you can tell Blohon respects what he respects. I mean, he's making some plays that do not seem intuitive on the surface, but he puts a lot of value on having that harness lighting in the hand as an answer to Archangel Avacyn. And to do that, he needs an energy left over. And to do that, you got to do some painful stuff sometimes.
Yeah, so he declines the value of Blinking Oath of Nissa in order to keep Harness Lightning up. Now, keep in mind the Scrounger's coming back and there's a Shambling Vent, so things are dangerous from Lukas Blohon's perspective. He wants to protect himself as best he can. And
with Release the Gremlins and Tamiyo as the leftovers, it doesn't feel likely that Blohon runs out of stuff and that's how he loses. It's basically his life total getting punked out.
Yeah, so this game is wild. Lukas Blohon has taken a loose control over the game, but he's going to have to give Márcio a lot more draw steps, and anything can happen from here.
And falling now to 4, which means that an end of turn Archangel Avacyn sets up lethal. He's getting into a spot where Unlicensed Disintegration is likely to kill him as well.
So what would you say is his best play on this turn, just to plus Tamiyo on his opponent's 2 creatures?
That makes the most sense to me. You could. The problem with Release is there's only the one artifact creature in play, and it just comes back. So all it is you're just getting a 2/2 for 3 for your trouble here, and it doesn't change the equation on Archangel Avacyn, and it also doesn't change the equation on Unlicensed Disintegration also, because you lose a blocker. So I think you just have to play Tamiyo and pass. And now if you're in Blohon's position, you are just hoping that Carvalho cooperates with some big main phase artifact.
That would be perfect. Now, he plussed on his own Felidar Guardian, I guess, as a concession to Walking Ballista. He figures that would be a card that would perhaps have Márcio attacking with Scrap Heap Scrounger, but not 3-bit Inspector. So a subtle play there, but thoughtful. We see Carvalho pick up Archangel Avacyn, the most threatening possible card in this board state, with Lukas at 4 and having mostly sorcery speed answers.
Yeah, I feel like if you're in Blohon's position here, you've got to try to convert this Tamiyo into some cards, because it's not really defending you from the cards that kill you right now. And I think you got to at least try to find some fresh cards with it.
So would you plus on your own Felidar Guardian and attack?
And I guess that doesn't really get you very far either. I don't know. It's weird because it looks like, in theory, he has these very powerful defensive measures afforded to him, but Carvalho's cards aren't quite good enough for them to work.
He definitely can cash in and release the Gremlins if he feels a sense of urgency in terms of attacking, getting a card out of Tamiyo. But looks like he's going to wait at least one more turn. We know that it's unlikely to work out well for him because of the Archangel Avacyn.
Yep.
Wow, and that's it. It looks like, barring something very strange happening with Tamiyo this turn, we're going to be going to game 3 because Archangel Avacyn cannot be stopped by what Blohon has access to right now.
Yeah, there was an opportunity there for Blohon to just rip off the combo, but no cooperation, just a Tune with Ether off the top here, and I think Archangel Avacyn will be making short work of this.
Yeah, the only way he could possibly find an answer is if he decides to plus Tamiyo and attack, but given the information Lucas has available to him, that seems like a far-fetched idea.
Also likely to line up with Archangel Avacyn the wrong way.
Yes.
If that's the card you're playing around here, then I think attacking is a non-starter.
Lucas made some conservative decisions earlier in this game, which generally I think is a good, healthy approach to this matchup. But, things slipped away a little bit from him, and it'd be curious to go back and dissect every spot that we went through. So there were a lot of close choices.
It was interesting to me because it felt like Blohon was putting a premium on Harness Lightning as an answer to Archangel Avacyn, and then wanted to manage all of Carvalho's cards with kind of the other resources that he had, and then fired off the Harness Lightning in a spot where it was certainly productive. Maybe he's also worried about unlicensed disintegration. Certainly there's an argument, but the amount of conservative plays he made to me felt exclusively like a concession to Archangel Avacyn, and then the Harness Lightning got spent elsewhere. Yeah.
Which eventually he got into a position where, in my opinion, he was sort of forced to use the Harness Lightning, but it's the the classic risk of painting yourself into a corner where you have played conservatively all game and suddenly can't do it anymore and things go poorly.
Yep.
But yeah, Archangel Avacyn's going to do it, and we're going to have a game 3.
Be very careful about how you want to click here. If you see some delays on these last easy attacks, it is you are just a misclick away from maybe losing. So it'll slow down towards the end.
Speaking as someone who's been there, you're going over your mouse and your hand is shaking. You're like, oh, I'm about to win. Don't mess anything up.
So you see Carvalho here going back to the drawing board a little bit, and I have to imagine play versus draw motivates a lot of these decisions, particularly with veteran motorist.
Yeah, and the quick change that Lukas Blohon makes is the second negate coming in. I think you mentioned it, a play draw thing when it comes to that. Yeah, and Márcio just experimenting with those last handful of slots, the veteran motorists, the Sky Sovereign, the fatal pushes. Toolcraft Exemplar is gone.
Yeah, and in some of these post-board games, he's shown a couple of the weird cards that Josh Arlene in his interview mentioned as getting out of the deck right away. So he's keeping a couple of copies of Shock. Now, Shock interacts with the combo, so it's not quite as narrow as Fatal Push, but he has shown Fatal Push in the post-board game here against Blohon, although right now all 4 are sitting on the sideline.
Yeah, I think Fatal Push is fairly unexciting, but Shock I actually like. I like the efficiency. You can disrupt the combo, but also just a crucial turn where you can kill a Rogue Refiner and get an extra couple damage. That sometimes is exactly what you need in the early game situations.
Yeah, there's 2 big things. One, Shock is good against Rogue Refiner, where Fatal Push is not reliably good. And the other is Shock helps you in the Planeswalker battles, and often Fatal Push does not.
Márcio's first opening hand had 2 lands with no red mana and a lot of Heart of Kiran's. I think 3. He threw that one back and now has something he's probably much happier with.
Yep. Heart of Kiran, plus interaction, plus a creature to crew, and something to play for later on in the game. So this has been kind of the mixture that we've seen this deck have in the games it's won in this matchup.
But looks like Lukas Blohon has the negate that could be ready for the turn 2 Heart of Kiran if he decides to play slow and not deploy the Servant of the Conduit.
It's tough to if he had red mana in the hand, I think it's different. Without having access to red mana, I think he'll probably feel compelled to cast the Servant of the Conduit on 2. That might get a window for Heart of Kiran. Now, with several copies of Harness Lightning, maybe you're not as concerned about the Heart of Kiran because you have interaction and you have an energy to spare with the Servant. But if red mana comes off the top, it's different.
And there it is.
All right, well, let's see.
No, he goes for it anyway.
Yeah, still prioritizing efficiency.
Yeah, it might be fairly disastrous if he declines to play the Servant and Marcio just leads with something like a Scrap Heap Scrounger. Then there's not a lot of great options.
Definitely. And also, if he wants to keep this negate, on Planeswalker and Sky Sovereign detail, especially with a hand that can interact with Heart of Kirin, maybe you wouldn't even want to negate it, even if the circumstances lined up.
Man, Carvalho's hand is a lot better than Blohon's in this game. Blohon has some nice defensive cards, but his deck isn't really doing what his deck needs to do. He has got to find some action, some Oath of Nissas and Rogue Refiners to get the ball rolling a little bit before he can, really establish a board presence.
Yep. And I like the no attack there from Carvalho, respecting the possibility of Harness Lightning there. Doesn't want to have the Heart of Kirin just run in. So just plays the creature that could crew and says go.
Yeah, and he actually makes Lukas spend one of those very valuable removal spells on a Scrap Heap Scrounger that presumably can come back a handful of turns down the road. Lukas in no danger yet because Negate can take care of Gideon, but again, he has to find something off the top of his library or else he's eventually just going to, be ground into dust.
And Blohon here, vulnerable to the second Gideon that Carvalho has drawn off the top as well.
Felidar Guardian with nothing profitable to blink. That's always a frustrating situation for the 4-color copycat deck. It's exactly what Lukas Blohon did not want to see against a slow hand with lots of spot removal. Gideon is the killer card.
Yep. Especially now with Carvalho having the ability to crew next turn if he wants it. And the air is a place where the Saheeli Rai deck blocks a lot worse than on the ground.
Oath of Chandra is actually a good start. That opens up some prospective good top decks later in the game to be able to manage this Planeswalker battle.
Definitely.
Awkward here because Blohon would love to attack Gideon with Harness Lightning backup in case Gideon crews Heart of Kirin, but the Servant, ironically, is his only source of red mana left.
Yeah, can't make the attack there, and it's kind of on the table, too. I don't even know if there's a bluff to make, so has to hold back.
And it might work out better as Carvalho has drawn Archangel Avacyn, which Harness Lightning is one of the few good answers to.
It wouldn't surprise me if Carvalho kind of went in a different path here and, cast the Scrounger, tried to grind down Blohon's removal a little bit. Although it looks like he's just going to sit on Avacyn.
Yeah, I agree with you. If he, read him for Harness Lightning, you could play the game, let the game develop a little bit more before you deploy Archangel Avacyn.
Yeah, that's especially with Blohon having the energy already in reserve, so Harness Lightning lines up the right way. It felt like with Blohon not really doing anything, you could kind of grind him down, crew your vehicle, get back another vehicle. Although there could be an incentive not to add another artifact to the battlefield because of Release the Gremlins. So a lot of consideration there.
Yep. Also playing another creature, if you're thinking of Felidar Guardian, blinking Oath of Chandra, a main phase low toughness creature is not the best.
Right. So now Blohon contemplating attacks here, but this is a tough spot. Remember, the Heart of Kirin can be crewed just with a Gideon loyalty counter, and if you respect Archangel Avacyn, you've only got the one removal spell. So your Servant of the Conduit would just get swallowed up in combat one way or the other.
Yeah, this is the nightmare scenario. If he was to attack, Heart of Kirin would get crewed, and if he cast Harness Lightning, he would just lose everything to the Avacyn.
Yep. big swing coming here from Carvalho in just a moment.
Yeah, so Harness Lightning can take care of Archangel Avacyn. He has the option of chump blocking Gideon if Márcio doesn't spend the shock, but things are getting ugly.
The discipline from Carvalho this game has also been great because there was a bunch of times where he had shock in his hand against Servant of the Conduit, and mana efficiency was at a premium, and there were things going on in combat that could have really compelled Carvalho to want to use the shock. But I think he feels like he can win the game. He can grind this game down, and the shock being insurance against the combo is more potent than the tempo he could get by shocking a Servant of the Conduit.
Great point.
It's really hard when you got a shock in your hand against a 2/2 mana creature to just let that go for a while. But Carvalho has done that, and you can see it's great because the Servant of the Conduit really didn't amount to much. And if Carvalho had used that shock, he would be exposed to the combo here. As dominant as he has been in this game so far, it could still get stolen from him.
Blohon trying to hang on, but he's got a lot to contend with here. It's going to be a tough road.
Yep. Although he does get to blink out the Oath of Chandra with his Spelldar Guardian and get rid of a creature for his trouble. He also now has Warlord Virtuoso with 6 energy, so he has some amount of blocking in the air. But his path to go from here to getting to a winning position seems very complicated.
Oh, wow.
And that has made it harder.
Yep. So Sky Sovereign will kill Warlord Virtuoso. Blohon will make a couple Thopters in response and just cross his fingers for release the gremlins off the top of his library.
Right. And Blohon also now at 0 cards in hand, too. You get into spots a lot against the Helioride where you have to play around the perfect 2 cards, but it's rare that 1 card can beat you as long as you have the combo on check.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with no Oath of Nissa in play. There's no shenanigans like Feldar Guardian blinking an Oath finding Saheeli.
Yep.
With an Evolving Wilds off the top, I think this game is over.
Carvalho will have come down from down a match and losing game 1 here to tie this up.
Yeah, so 3 attackers and Sky Sovereign will... 4 attackers, actually, with the Shambling Vent. Sky Sovereign will kill Warlord Virtuoso and 1 Thopter token, not nearly enough to allow Lucas to survive.
Way too much coming across.
Okay, so we're tied 1-1. Our player is going to a rubber match here in this marathon battle between Lukas Blohon and Márcio Carvalho.
The Blohon there, his opening hand looked fine. You know, it was lands and spells, interaction, negates and harness lightnings and so forth, but there was never really any way in the hand to pull ahead to accrue multiple cards or to do anything particularly threatening. And he has to be kind of reading and responding the whole time while taking hits and having Carvalho develop his battlefield. And without ever finding one of those payoff cards, his draw, even though, again, his opening hand looked fine on the surface, really didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, the problem, Patrick, is that neither of these decks can be shut down easily. It's not a classic beatdown versus control matchup where you just survive the early rush and that's it. Both decks play great off the top. They have card advantage sources and planeswalkers, and you have to be able to put them away in addition to surviving that early rush. That's what Lucas couldn't do in that game.
Yeah, managing the battlefield while also pulling ahead, while also protecting yourself from getting, backdoored out of the game, be it through the combo or via Archangel Avacyn or Walking Ballista and some of these long games from the other side. It's complicated to thread the needle because you're being pulled in so many different directions. Both decks are. In these games have been really compelling to watch, and it looks like the players are really reading and responding to the cards they have drawn and what they are playing around at any given moment, rather than saying, I'm the beatdown, this is the way the games play. I'm the control deck, this is the way the games play.
All right, well, don't go anywhere because after a brief commercial break, we're coming back for the third match between Márcio Carvalho and Lukas Blohon.
Hi, I'm Chris Cox. I'm president of Wizards of the Coast. I was born in 1973, and I like to play Magic, Axis and Allies, Diplomacy, Betrayal at House on the Hill, and Dungeons and Dragons.
All right. When did you first start playing Magic?
I started playing Magic either late winter of 1994 or like January, February of 1995 when I was a junior in college.
What did you want to be when you were a child?
Oh, I wanted to be a scientist.
What is your favorite color, shard, or guild?
Whenever I play, I tend to favor white-black. I like kind of like the mid-tempo decks. And the flavor combination of those two.
What's your favorite 90s jam?
Oh, God. So many good ones and so many bad ones. Probably the one I liked to listen to the most was All-Star by Smash Mouth.
How do you define success and how do you measure it?
Success? Well, I think being happy and making other people happy.
What was your proudest moment playing Magic?
Oh, gosh. I beat Aaron Forsythe once, so that was I was pretty proud about that. Of course, he mulliganed like 3 times, but I'll still take it.
What were you like in high school?
Well, maybe that was me. What was I like in high school? I think one word, insufferable. Hopefully I've improved a little bit over the ages.
What is your guilty pleasure food?
Tootsie Rolls.
And what is something that's true that almost no one agrees with you on?
I think a mashup of Dungeons and Dragons and Magic would be epically cool.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Wow. After 6 brutal games of Magic, the score is tied 1-1 Márcio Carvalho with Mardu Vehicles against Lukas Blohon with 4-color Saheeli Rai combo. Patrick, what are your thoughts so far?
Well, the games are really intricate, and they shift quite a bit. Both players can come back from losing positions, which makes the dynamic a lot more interesting than your typical I'm the beatdown deck, I'm the control deck. We have seen Carvalho get into spots several times where he has stopped attacking because he feels like if he drags the game out for a couple more turns, he has a huge edge because maybe he's waiting for one more land that he has Archangel Avacyn, or waiting for an artifact to pair with Unlicensed Disintegration, or whatever the case may be. And it's very uncommon to see the beatdown deck take that kind of control, that role in the matchup. And we've seen spots where Blohon has flipped the table and started damage racing, even though he's ostensibly the control deck. So really dynamic gameplay, super intricate, and it's great to watch have this matchup played by two players as great as the ones we're watching.
Yeah, it's just been great Magic so far. The balance that each player has to strike between protecting themselves, protecting their planeswalkers, managing the combo, and playing a normal game of Magic where you have to grind card advantage and manage your board presence. It's just so much to think about, and I don't think that you and I could really come up with any, couple of sentences to summarize this matchup. It's just such a complicated endeavor with so many moving parts, and like you said, it is awesome watching players of this caliber, dive into it.
The one shortcut that I would say is what I've noticed is it's really important to get your work done up front, because if you fall behind and someone sticks one of the planeswalkers, that determines the game. And in terms of the ways where turn 4 happens and we say, okay, this one's kind of over, it usually involves, Chandra killing the one threat on the other side of the battlefield, or Gideon resolving and the other player not really having any recourse. So a lot of the steps we see these players take on various turns is insulating themselves ahead of time from the consequences of the other player playing a planeswalker the next turn. That's where a lot of the nuance in the games has occurred in the early stages. And if you wanted a shortcut on playing this matchup better, obviously to play at this level just takes a lot of skill and a lot of repetition. But always have the thought in your head of what are the consequences of my opponent deploying a planeswalker here. And sometimes you can only slow play things so much because you need to make sure your battlefield presence is sufficient that you don't get buried by something like Gideon or Chandra.
Yeah, Gideon and Chandra, just two of the not only the hallmark cards of Standard, but the central cards of these games. Putting yourself in a position to take maximum advantage of them and pressure your opponents if they play them too early. That's like what it's all about. And some of these games are just as simple as an unanswered Gideon running away with things.
And what's also interesting about that Gideon-Chandra dynamic is one does not necessarily trump the other. There's spots where Chandra invalidates Gideon or close to it on the other side of the table, and there's times where Gideon invalidates Chandra. So it's not as simple as saying, well, I'll play mine first, or I wait to respond to my opponent's planeswalker with my own copy, because on some board states, your planeswalker is good enough to run away with it, and in some, it's invalidated by the opposing planeswalker or the opposing battlefield. So there's no shortcuts to these games. There's no, as you mentioned, we couldn't write a paragraph or two and hand it over to your average player at FNM and have them be able to play the matchup proficiently. You just got to get in a lot of reps and try various builds, because these players have been also built differently from the other semifinal lists, and do the work yourself, because as you see, these games are just extremely complicated to play.
Another cool thing is that each player has access to a different tool in these Planeswalker battles. Oath of Chandra on Lukas Blohon's 4-color Saheeli side, and Unlicensed Disintegration on Márcio Carvalho's Mardu Vehicles side give ways to damage directly the opponent or the opponent's Planeswalkers, and those can be big factors here. So, Márcio Carvalho, #1 ranked player in the world in Magic the Gathering right now. Runner-up at Pro Tour Aether Revolt, runner-up at last year's World Championships. Just a player that seemingly can't be stopped, particularly in Limited. And yeah, here you see his pretty impressive match win percentage on his Magic Online account, particularly that 69% limited win rate is nothing to sneeze at.
And Magic Online, I think, draws in a lot of very competitive players for a variety of reasons. And so that 69% win percentage that you see, that's not just against a random sampling of Magic players worldwide. That's against a group that's largely self-selected for skill and for interest in playing in competitive tournaments. So winning close to 70% of your matches in Magic is impressive no matter what, and particularly on Magic Online, where I think the average competitor is much tougher than you're going to see at your local store.
Yeah, even among a pool of extremely talented players, Marcio really stands out. Particularly,
yeah, and that's been a recurring theme with a lot of the competitors we've had in this. People with mid to high 60 win percentage rates at Magic Online, to me, is just very, very impressive.
Lukas Blohon, similarly, one of the most well-respected Magic players of recent years, Pro Tour champion from last year, Pro Tour Eldritch Moon, and from you see from his stats, an extremely well-balanced player that can, that has chops in both limited and constructed.
And someone a little bit more active on Magic Online than Márcio Carvalho, who had shade under 2,000 matches played to Lukas over 6,000, 65% win percentage across both formats, slightly worse win rate than Márcio in limited, slightly better in constructed. So these players winning at about a 2/3 clip across the board in Magic Online. Very, very impressive stuff. And now in the top 4 of this tournament with the opportunity to become the Magic Online champion.
All right, the match is up, so let's get to it. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for the deciding match between Lukas Blohon and Márcio Carvalho. This match will determine which of these two players takes on Josh Utter-Leyton Raptor in the finals of the Magic Online Championships.
And Lukas, as the loser of the previous match, gets the option to play first in game 1 here of our third and final match.
Man, and take a look at Marcio's hand. This is just the classic Vehicles beatdown draw of turn 1 Toolcraft Exemplar, turn 2 Scrap Heap Scrounger. You have highlighted, I think correctly so, that flying damage is a really important aspect of this particular matchup. And Márcio doesn't have it, but let's see if the raw speed of that hand can make something happen.
And on the other side of here, Blohon's opening hand of lands, Oath of Nissas, and the combo, we really have not seen just a dead race to a turn 4 kill in this matchup, even though that's often how the matchup is stereotyped. We might see it here. Carvalho's hand, very, very aggressive, capable of a fast kill, and if Blohon's mana comes together the right way, he might be able to turn 4 here as well.
That's right. Funny enough, he has only access to 2 of his 4 colors, but Oath of Nissa can allow him to cast Saheeli Rai without red mana, so just a single Plains or Ether Hub could have this game over as early as turn 4 on the play.
And a Servant of Conduit off the top there, that will also do.
Man, is there any better feeling than to be playing such a high-pressure deciding match like this and just have the full combo in your opening hand?
You gotta feel good, especially you're up a match already. It's a tough one to lose, but this is a nice way to start the rally back.
Yeah, and Márcio found what he was missing in a flying attacker, but what he hasn't found yet is a way to disrupt the combo.
And it's not like Márcio can now sit on his heels here and represent some sort of removal. It's too early in the game for that. So we might be done here real fast.
Yeah, it looks like this is going to be it, so long as Lukas Blohon decides to go for it.
And this is the issue, you can't sit back forever because you're playing against 5 cards in hand and some card advantage already accrued, and you could just be beating this game by removal or more value from enters the battlefield trigger. So you've got to tap out and do your thing, and sometimes this is the consequence.
Wow, this is the fastest game, fastest game of the day by far.
Yeah, we've had some slogs. I mean, these have been 6 long games by and large, but Carvalho there with a very explosive hand capable of killing quickly. You see the unlicensed disintegration in his hand, but just wasn't able to do everything he needed to against a hand that could kill on turn 4.
Yeah, and listen to us clowns ranting about how complicated the matchup is. You know, we couldn't explain how the Sihili combo works in 2 paragraphs.
Right. The matchup is complicated. That does not mean every game of the matchup is complicated.
Of course,
sometimes
yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
And I guess it's the threat of these quick wins hanging over everything that really does, change the dynamic of the games that do drag on and go longer.
Yep. And you can see that players have been sideboarding a lot. I mean, this is now the 5th post-board game that they are playing, I believe. And we've seen a lot of switching, though mostly driven by play-draw decisions rather than trying to, mix up the deck or present something very different in the post-board games.
Lukas Blohon 1 game away from the finals of the Magic Online Championships. Márcio Carvalho, though, not going to give up. He's so far in this match performed better in the sideboarded games, and he's going to fight his hardest to try to win these last 2.
And this is a similar hand to the one that we saw in game number 1 from Carvalho. Very explosive draw, but not backed up by much in the way of interaction. These kind of hands play much better on the play than on the draw, though.
Agreed. Wow, look at him going after the Scrap Heap Scrounger rather than the Toolcraft Exemplar. Is that sort of wishful thinking, hoping that he can cut Márcio on artifacts?
Well, that's part of it. I think the recursiveness of it is, that really only starts manifesting later on in the game in most circumstances. Also, Carvalho was on a Spire of Industry and no natural source of black mana. So it's possible that if you kill the Scrounger there, that he just doesn't even have black mana to recur it if you get to that point. And it looks like Blohon's just got another hand that can race through the combo.
Yeah, he really has it all this time. He has the combo in addition to an extra removal spell, which is going to be important against Thalia.
I mean, he even has the option next turn of simply, playing the Feldar Guardian and blinking out the Oath of Chandra should Carvalho decide to play Thalia.
Yeah, that would be a backbreaking play.
With the combo rolled up, and Carvalho with an incentive to cast Sky Sovereign on turn 5. So, we were going on and on about the complexities of these games, but sometimes it can be pretty straightforward.
Man, hard to believe that after such a marathon match, we could just have 2 quick ones end it like this. Well, it certainly seems like the play of Blinking Oath of Chandra makes sense. It sets up the win for next turn, and it takes away Carvalho's most potent threat. Again, the classic question is can you play around Unlicensed Disintegration? Do you have a way of beating it?
Well,
and
you can kind of...
He might kill Scrap Heap Scrounger here for that reason.
Oh, yeah, that's another opportunity to cut off of black mana. The problem is, though, if he wants to combo out, he can't do it through the Thalia. So if he's just going to go for broke next turn. Now, with his life total at 8, he might say, I can't beat Unlicensed Disintegration in this game anyway. There's no way I'm going to be able to keep my life total high enough that he might be willing to ignore it regardless.
Oh, and that's Unlicensed Disintegration off the top.
We'll find out now.
he might be able to beat it, or might have been able to beat it if he had targeted the Scrounger, because next turn he has 5 mana and Oath of Chandra in hand anyway to take out Thalia. And if he was, we have a lot more information than Lukas does, but if you knew that Márcio had only Spire of Industry and no other castable artifact cutting him on black mana is a huge plus.
Yep. Although if he wants to put I guess now he can't put the Warlord Virtuoso in front of the Scrounger and force the issue, because Carvalho could simply get back the other Scrounger and then have an artifact plus a Spire of Ministry plus 3 mana.
You're right. Wow, from a game that we were almost ready to call in favor of Lukas Blohon, this unlicensed disintegration off the top might put things actually quite firmly back in Márcio Carvalho's favor.
Imagine with this block happening here that Carvalho is going to take the opportunity to get back the other Scrounger.
Yep, a great play that I think it would be easy to miss if you weren't terribly experienced with Standard and with Mardu vehicles in general.
And now you still don't have a line to cut off the artifacts, because if you use your Oath of Chandra here to get rid of the Scrounger, he can simply float a black. Although I guess at that point you're liable to get killed by the combo potentially. I guess you can float a black and allow him to move to combat, and then he either has the combo, he goes for something, or he doesn't, and then you can get the Scrounger back.
Well, that would be a strange way for things to go. There's a subtle rules interaction that doesn't come up much, but say Márcio is floating black mana. Lukas says, okay, I pass priority, ready to go to combat. Now, if Márcio decides to spend his black mana on returning Scrap Heap Scrounger, that gives Lukas priority again in his main phase. So it's an interaction that comes up almost never, let's say once in 10,000 games of Magic. It could wind up deciding this game depending on how these two players decide to navigate this.
And that Thalia was really disruptive last turn because Blohon was not able to play the Game Trail in his hand. He had to play the Forest instead. And now you can see if that Game Trail came into the battlefield untapped this turn, that line could potentially happen, as you mentioned.
Such discipline from Lukas Blohon this whole tournament, not going for the combo when he might have an easy win here.
So now with the black floating, I guess we'll see what Blohon does. I would imagine he just moves into combat here as the first order of business and see what Carvalho does.
Yeah, surely Márcio will return Scrap Heap Scrounger. If he had intended to cast Unlicensed Disintegration, he would of course have done it while his artifact was still in play.
Yeah.
And you're right, if it was an untapped land instead of a Game Trail, the game would be over here.
So by Blohon navigating the game the way that he's done thus far, he's at least not allowed Carvalho to efficiently play Unlicensed Disintegration and the Sky Sovereign. And that Archangel Avacyn off the top there, I think a great draw for Carvalho, because he would still be in the spot here where he'd have to make a determination, do I tap out to advance my board here and risk dying to the combo, or do I hold up Unlicensed Disintegration and play the game kind of inefficiently?
Well, this is a pretty impressive turn here where he kills the Feldar Guardian, forces both of Blohon's creatures to block, and then next turn he's going to have one of his creatures plus a Needle Spires still in the tank to try to win the game.
Yep.
Oh, but that's one of the few cards in Blohon's deck that can produce multiple blockers here. Actually, 3 blockers, 4 if he decides to copy it with Saheeli Rai.
And now that unlicensed disintegration, which was Carvalho's cover for the combo, is gone, that was my one concern, was pushing that hard that turn. Is if it winds up that you don't get the game done in the next 2 turns, you have no removal, you're potentially vulnerable to combo. Part of the reason I thought Carvalho might have just sat on Avacyn plus unlicensed disintegration and just whatever happens, you have a response, but decided to try to force the issue, and now a little risky.
Yeah, so what's going to happen now? Marcio might try to play Sky Sovereign and kill the Whirler Virtuoso. That would allow him a at least reasonable attack with Toolcraft Exemplar into the Thopter tokens.
I don't know. I think with Blohon at 2, I guess because he gets to make the Thopters regardless, you don't get one clean attack in the air to win this game. The Sky Sovereign does potentially open you up to release the Gremlins in a way that Avacyn doesn't. But I guess you probably want to get an artifact on the battlefield for the Toolcraft Exemplar to make an attack regardless.
Yeah, so if he plays Sky Sovereign, kills the Whirler Virtuoso, Blohon will make 2 Thopter tokens in response. Then the Toolcraft Exemplar can attack, either trading with both Thopters or just eating one of them. Next turn, any creature that crews Sky Sovereign should be lethal based on what's on the board.
Yep. And I guess there's also an incentive to get an artifact on the battlefield, so that you then have black mana again in case you draw Unlicensed Disintegration or some other black card.
That too. Pia Nalar, not quite lethal here. So he's going to make the Sky Sovereign play and just hope to fade a draw step here. Felidar Guardian, of course, the most dangerous one. That would be a win on the spot, but even something like Release the Gremlins or, a redraw in the form of Oath of Nissa, Rogue Refiner. Ooh, and he only made 1 Thopter token.
I guess that keeps him drawing to... I mean, is Harness Lightning the consideration here?
Oh, he has no white mana if he uses his energy.
Right.
Wow, and that's going to be the game.
Yeah. Missed on the draw step there. Felidar Guardian would have been game over.
A timely unlicensed disintegration off the top for Márcio Carvalho protects him from the combo, and a few turns later, he is the winner of game 2 here.
Again, as you mentioned before, just being very careful about how you click here. But I don't think there's any spell here that Blohon could have drawn that's really worth 2 spells. And he needs 2 spells to survive, assuming that Carvalho casts any of his creatures.
Yeah, he knows he has the Archangel Avacyn just in case Blohon has a removal spell. Okay, game 9.
I like Blohon doing a little rabbit hole in there, looking at the top cards of the deck, contemplating what could have been had the draw step been a little bit different.
Did not think I'd ever cover a game 9 of a single contest.
I've been doing this for a bit, and this is the first time for me also. And then I got to settle back in for the finals.
Yeah, I mean, if we think we're tired, imagine being Lukas Blohon or Márcio Carvalho in this match.
Yeah, I can barely get through a Grand Prix anymore, and these matches have been quite a bit more intense, much higher quality of competition. Stakes have been higher, so.
I'll tell you,
great to watch.
Some of these high pressure, Magic sets, endurance really becomes a factor, because it's one thing to play a good game of Magic. It's quite another to play 9 good games of Magic in a high pressure, adrenaline pumping, situation where you're against one of the best players in the world in a complicated match. It's just difficult. It's
with thousands of people watching too. I mean,
yeah, of course.
As if you needed any more pressure. So it looks like both players not really doing a whole lot of switching here. Blohon on the play for game number 3 has brought in the second copy of Negate. We've seen that before. So I imagine these players just doing their last-minute due diligence, and will be firing up for game 3/game 9 here in a moment.
Yeah, so these players have not really deviated too much from their basic game plans in terms of sideboarding. Seemed like they had more or less a framework that they knew they wanted to work within, and then they're just changing the last couple of cards based on they're changing instincts and what they're learning about the matchup and just play versus draw.
Yeah, I think that last part of it is the big one there. I think there's a lot of these decks want to, I think Márcio has put more of a premium on being reactive when he's been on the draw. I think that's where we've seen cards like Fatal Push maybe be the last card that he adds. The question for Blohon, I think, with a lot of his reactive cards is the breathing space. Will I have the time to be able to cast a spell efficiently? And I think Negate is a great example of, on the play, yeah, I think pretty reliably I'll be able to get ahead and then tag something valuable. When he's on the draw, he might be so far behind on the battlefield that he just needs to be tapping out more frequently. And at that point, the Negate becomes much sketchier.
Nice hands from both players. Carvalho definitely with a slower hand than some of the ones we've seen him with, but all his colors of mana, he can develop nicely by cracking the clues off Thraben Inspector. I think this is, while it's not his dream hand, something that he's pretty happy to work with.
Yeah, the hand's really lacking a play in the middle. It's got something to do early on and something to play towards, but it's missing a quality mid-range threat. That's really the only part that's missing from this hand.
Oh, how's that for a quality mid-range threat?
Yeah, that's not bad. He is a little short on crew material to work with right now, but at the minimum, getting to fill out his mana, a great draw there.
On Blohon's side, missing red mana for the purposes of Harnessed Lightning, but he's going to be able to develop pretty well also by casting Rogue Refiner and then potentially on turn 4 either Tireless Tracker or Felidar Guardian.
So the sticking point here from Carvalho's side is if he plays the Heart of Kirin here, he has to play the Concealed Courtyard. That leaves his leftover lands that enter the battlefield tapped. So he's potentially looking at a turn 3 of play a land tapped and either crack a clue or cast Thraben Inspector, but not both. So it doesn't surprise me to see him take the turn off, essentially, leave his turn 3 a little bit more efficient, either cracking a clue plus shocking or casting the Heart of Kirin, giving up a little bit of development this turn to get more efficient down the line, particularly when that Heart of Kirin isn't even crewable right now.
Yeah, the reason I don't like that play so much is because Concealed Courtyard has to be played next turn anyway if it wants to come into play untapped. So, while sometimes I do like the concept of slowing down a turn and getting your tapped lands out, there's not really that much long-run profit since now he sequenced things in a way where he has one additional tapped land.
Sure.
But like you said, given that he didn't draw something to crew the Heart of Kirin, it didn't wind up costing him damage.
And Blohon with the combo rolled up. And remember that he can cast a Helirai off the Oath of Nissa even if he lacks red mana. So now, Carvalho's in that tough spot of, do I have enough going on the table right now to be able to leave up some interaction, or do I need to tap out? Now, fortunately for him, his hand contains Shock. Shock's kind of the best way to manage that sort of spot because it's not 3 mana like unless it's Disintegration, so he can be doing other things and still be able to interact with the combo.
Yeah, also fortunately for him, he just doesn't have anything else good to play, so it seems like he's likely to...
And that's for sure.
likely to pass with mana open, but things are looking good for Lukas Blohon here, especially with that Release the Gremlins in hand and a 5th mana source. It's not that there's anything, that he desperately needs to kill, but just getting the clean, 3-4 for 1 advantage of Release the Gremlins is so hard to overcome.
And
wow, he drew
Carvalho,
negates. So
Carvalho there, that was almost his tournament right there, because if he didn't main phase that Unlicensed Disintegration, he would have had negate cover for the Saheeli Rai, and we'd be done here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Carvalho's done a really excellent job across this match of just timing his reactive cards the right way. And yeah, if he just passed and hoped to trap, that would have been the tournament. Some intricate games you've been watching.
Yeah. Passing with Archangel Avacyn mana available. Lukas Blohon thinking at the end of the turn. He has the option to crack his Clue or cast Harness Lightning, though of course no real juicy targets for the Harness Lightning.
Or crack the Clue. I think that's the deliberation right now.
Right.
Because, from Blohon's perspective, theoretically, he could play a very passive game where he untaps, passes, he's got Harness Lightning to cover the Archangel Avacyn, he's got Negate to cover a variety of follow-ups, so he may not be inclined to expose this Tireless Tracker to something like Shock or Unlicensed Disintegration.
Yeah. Yeah, he's really got all his bases covered here. Harness Lightning for Archangel Avacyn, Negate for any removal spell or big vehicle, and then Release the Gremlins once he's ready is going to be a huge swing.
Yep, and you can see here that he did it. He did that on the main phase there, crack the Clue, because if Carvalho wants to shock him a response, that keeps him off of 5 mana, and then he doesn't have to worry about Archangel Avacyn that turn.
Yeah, I would not have cracked on the main phase because of Archangel Avacyn certainly should be a card on his radar, and then he wants to hold up Negate, and I wouldn't want to be in a position where I have to draw an untapped land in order to do that.
I think that I would have wanted to. I think I would have cracked. My instinct is to crack there, just because the value of hitting a land here is so high to keep the Tireless Tracker rolling, and also just to play efficiently. His hand's getting a little gummed up right now. The negate consideration is definitely valid, but what are the non-creature spells you're really afraid of in this spot?
Yeah, the Harness Lightning, the Release the Gremlins does change things, but something like a Gideon. I mean, sure. You're sitting so comfortable in that you have answers to everything. You can pass with your mana open, and your opponent has to make the first move. You have the stronger deck in the late game. Why risk it? I mean, I understand that the last thing you want to do with the Tireless Tracker in play is miss your land drop, but I just think when everything's going right, you should play for the worst case scenario. Also,
Blohon might be just fine taking 4 from Archangel Avacyn, holding up Negate, and then harnessing in a turn if nothing needs to be negated. I mean, if he's gone this far, he could have harnessed in a turn, so or on the upkeep or whatever. So I think he's committed just to taking the 4 damage here.
Yeah, fair enough.
And if you're willing to take the 4 in the worst case scenario where you miss the land drop, then I think you definitely crack, because if you find a land, it's so good. You pull so far ahead. And if you're not that worried about taking 4 damage, then whatever, take the 4 and go to 12. Yeah, I think I was hung up there just thinking, yeah, you have to harness right away if he plays Archangel Avacyn, and his life total is high enough that he might just not feel that way.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, no. Márcio is taking the bait here. He's going for the Archangel Avacyn flip, but Lukas Blohon is well prepared with Harnessed Lightning, either on the upkeep or at the end of the turn.
Yeah, I imagine we'll see a negate here and then a Harnessed Lightning on the upkeep. Man, Blohon got paid off in a big way for taking a line this disciplined.
Yeah, he really did. I'm sure Márcio was thinking that he would have cast Harnessed Lightning either right away, immediately, or before taking the 4 damage in combat. And he, wisely read him for negate and cast a shock before Chandra in order to potentially bait out negate. But it was just, the fact that Blohon had both.
Yep. Although red mana here is still a bit of a bottleneck.
At this point, I don't know. We might see Márcio just attack Lukas with the Heart of Kiran and hope to draw some burn spells to close out the game. He's so far behind in resources that I can't imagine trying to compete in a fair game anymore.
Yeah, you don't know what's going on exactly with Blohon's hand, but you know the following. He's been missing land drops. He has 6 cards in his hand, and he was willing to take 4 from an Archangel Avacyn to trap you. That indicates a very strong holding, and you might just need to go for broke here, ignore the Saheeli Rai, and hope that enough unlicensed disintegrations and Archangel Avacyns cobbled together can steal this game.
I think so. Starts by cracking a clue, might as well. And he's going to leave the other clue potentially to represent a threat. I don't know if he's going to play out the planes or not.
So Carvalho taking the opportunity there to break up the combo, got Saheeli Rai off the battlefield, did not go after Blohon's life total. And Carvalho, I think, tanking a little bit about whether or not he wanted to cast the Scrounger there, not because of bluffing, but because it just curves in to release the Gremlins. And again, Blohon's been sitting on all these cards, but a Scrounger, you can't really take it with you. It's not something that does a lot by sitting in your hand. So even though I think Carvalho knew this break was likely to occur, there isn't a whole lot to be gained here by sitting.
Yeah, and he's just been ground into dust in this game. He, to his credit, tried to take a spot there with Archangel Avacyn transforming. Would have probably won the game if Lukas Blohon didn't have Harness Lightning, but Blohon just, had him covered with all the right answers.
And Blohon just played that game so patiently, certainly more patient than my instinct suggested, and walked Carvalho into that trap. I mean, I think that Carvalho had to take a shot there because the game was slipping away from him and the ceiling on that play is so high. But I think Blohon also steered the game into making that play look attractive.
No artifact even for Toolcraft Exemplar unless he brings back Scrounger main phase. Blohon should just block everything. I think double block Needle Spires and put the Rogue Refiner in front of Toolcraft Exemplar.
Yep, trade. Keep the life total high. The only way this game can slip away from you is getting punked out by damage. So.
But even being so far ahead, there's still a lot of choices and a lot to think about. He's going to be careless with the win, so seemingly so close, but still a few turns away.
Yeah, I think the only question he had there is whether or not he wanted to crack the clue first before casting Whirler Virtuoso. I think this is a spot where leaving up Harness Lightning and making a play is so good that there's no reason to risk not having access to that if you fail to find a land off your Tireless Tracker.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Or he just wanted to spend his mana that way. In either event, washes out the same. And you can see, again, Blohon with showing even in moments like this, a lot of conservative play there. Could have fired off the second Thopter. I think a lot of players instinctually would have done that, but I think he just wants to keep as much energy back as possible for these Harness Lightnings, and getting out one Thopter ahead of schedule is not really going to tilt this game one way or the other.
Yeah, right. There's no reason to. I mean, you win by doing nothing, so why try to rush? Why spend your resources? He has a pretty clean attack with Tireless Tracker. It will beat any creature in combat because of the uncracked clue, and a multi-block just gets destroyed by Harness Lightning. And there's Negate, which closes the door on
the puzzle.
Many of the possible outs that Márcio may have had.
Yeah, I think prior to that draw step, we were still in a position where Carvalho stacked his deck. He couldn't win, and I think that negate just wraps it all up. But again, be careful with how you click. let's not rush this. A lot of money at stake. Just be slow. Timer at 17 minutes. No reason to rush.
Harness Lightning takes care of Thalia, and it's just a Scrap Heap Scrounger and a Heart of Kieran against the world.
Negate and release the gremlins in hand, and behind on the board.
So it seems to me like Blohon can put together a lethal attack here with Saheeli Rai. Perhaps there's no reason to even worry about it, but he can kill both artifacts
and
the vent. Wow, Márcio's had enough. That's it. So nine games, but Lukas Blohon is the winner in 2-1 over Márcio Carvalho.
So two things really stand out of that game. We saw a Tireless Tracker play a huge role, and that was a card that I don't think Blohon went to very frequently at all in the post-board games earlier in the match. So that was obviously very huge right there. And then I think that play there of being very passive, willing to take the hit, just goes to show you that this matchup is a lot more complicated than beat down versus control, because Blohon was willing to take a hit from Archangel Avacyn to, one, be efficient with his mana there, and two, potentially walk Carvalho into a trap where he got everything, and circumstances lined up right. And even though the game went on for several turns after that, that was really the determining sequence.
Yeah, game 3 of match 3 that we just watched and game 3 of match 2 were almost mirror images of each other, where one player had a good hand but full of slower reactive cards, and the opponent just had the grindy elements to punish that. In match 2, it was Carvalho who had the Gideon to punish Blohon's draw of mostly removal spells, and this time it was the Tireless Tracker sitting behind the wall of Harness Lightnings and Negates against Márcio's slow reactive hand that just matched up perfectly.
Yep, and then also Blohon showing a lot of patience there, not cracking the clue at the end of the turn. Wasn't willing to trade off that Tireless Tracker with a shock. That shock ended up being part of Carvalho's, tournament kind of ending there in that sequence where he tried to flip the Archangel Avacyn, and the Tireless Tracker ran away with the game. So that sequence from Carvalho's end of turn to Blohon's turn to Carvalho's turn again, and then in the upkeep where the Avacyn died, just a brilliant sequence there by Blohon. To me, that was the determining sequence in the game, and now he's going on to the finals.
Yeah, brilliant sequence. So that leads us to a finals between Lukas Blohon and Josh Utter-Leyton. two of the absolute best Magic players in the game right now. Both players playing the same matchup that they won in the semifinals. So we're gonna have to see which one can now finally break the unbreakable opponent that had made it through this matchup so many times to get to the finals.
And what Josh Erladen said in his winners interview right before we played the semifinals, he wasn't sure which one of the two between Carvalho and Blohon he was rooting for, but he thought the matchup on both sides was going to be a lot more challenging for him than the match he played in the semifinals.
All right, Patrick. Maria is on the floor with a presumably exhausted Lukas Blohon, but with a winner's interview ready for us.
Maria Bartholdi down here on the floor of the Magic Online Championship with Lukas Blohon, who's just secured a spot in the finals. Lukas, congratulations.
Thank you.
You're now for sure at least $17,000 richer. How do you feel going into the finals here?
Well, I feel great, obviously, but there's a big difference between first and second place.
Yes, there is.
So the finals will be pretty tough.
So how do you feel about your chances going in? You just got done playing a Mardu Vehicles deck. You're going to face one again. How do you feel about the matchup?
I don't know. I think it's tough, but I think Marcio's version was better against my deck than the Raptors version. So I think that it should be better than my semifinals match. But I think it's still a tough matchup. So I don't know if it's even, a bit worse for me, something like that. It's very close, definitely.
That was some nail-biting magic we just
watched.
watched.
Yeah, it was so close. Like, all the games were super close, and then the only thing I remember is like when match 1, game 3, I misclick and I didn't make 4 doctors with my Virtuoso, so I killed him turn after. And I don't know if there are any sequence of plays that would kill me from him, like draws, but that was so bad. Like.
Well, misclicks is actually something you have to kind of worry about in this championship.
Yeah, I know. Like after I clicked, okay, at the end of turn, I was like, wait, why do I have 13 energy and no doctors in play? Oh well. But yeah, it was definitely very close. And
how do you keep your stamina up through all of these matches? The best of 3. I mean, it's a lot of Magic to play across 3 days, nonetheless.
Yeah, it's exhausting. That's for sure. But I don't know if there's any trick to do it. It just, I don't know.
The commentators have been talking a lot about your discipline playing against Mardu Vehicles and making sure that you have a clear path to victory and all of that. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to playing versus that deck specifically?
I don't know. I think it's really hard to play from both sides of the match. Maybe a bit easier from my side because they have to make the choices when to respect the combo and when not, which is very hard to do. But from my side, I sometimes have to choose when I have to be aggressive, when I want to trade stuff. So, I mean, it's not easy, and I don't know. I just played a lot of matches against Mardu, so I guess I know when I should do something or when not. But there is not an easy way to say like you have to be aggressive or you have to wait for combo, because sometimes your only hope is to combo them. Sometimes you can just grind them out. It just game from game is different. So
and you chose to leave the combo in post sideboard as well.
Oh yes. I think it's like if you don't have the combo, they don't have to respect it, and I think it's the deck loses a lot of power if they can just make the value plays every turn and not worry about dying to combo.
Talk about that really cool moment, match 3, game 3, when you saw Márcio shock his own Thraben Inspector and try and follow it up with Chandra, which you were able to negate, and then Harness Lightning the Avacyn that was still on the battlefield. What was going through your mind at that point?
Well, I thought now that's great because he doesn't have anything, and I have like 5 or 6 cards in hand. So all I need to do is like draw a land or 2, then my tracker gets going, and I have answers for everything, and then I drew negate, so there was pretty much no way for me to lose the game. So yeah, when I saw him shocking his Thraben Inspector, I was like, all right, this is great, this is going well.
And you've had such a fantastic past year, winning a Pro Tour, qualifying for this event, and now making it into the finals. Oh, yeah. What do you attribute all that success to?
I don't know. I think I have great people around me who I test with, and I've learned a lot from them. So and I've tried to practice a lot because Magic is right now the only thing I do. So I try to do my best.
And what would it mean for you to take down this championship and win? Go home with the trophy.
That would be amazing. Like I said, because the difference between first and second place is so huge. Unlocking Platinum, Worlds, and next a Magic Online Championship, that's absurd.
Well, good luck to you in the finals. Thank you for taking time to talk to me.
Thank you.
Lukas Blohon, everybody. Back to you in the booth.